Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, taking place from the Walton Suite in the Winchester Guildhall. It's Wednesday, the 7th of February, 2024, and the time is 9:30. My name is Councillor Jane Rutter and I'm Chair of the Planning Committee. To my right is Councillor Edwards, who is Vice Chair of the Committee. Around the table, we have the other elected members of the committee, and we are supported today by a number of officers. To my left is Julie Pinnock, who is the Corporate Head of Planning and Regulatory Services. Daniel Lucas is our legal advisor. Our case officer will sit over here. The first case officer is Stephen Cornwall. And Claire Buchanan from Democratic Services supports the committee and operates the recording equipment. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Please can I remind everyone to ensure your mobile phones and any other electronic devices are on silent or preferably turned off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Please look at the handout provided on your chairs or on the information slides displayed as you walked in and during the breaks for further guidance about this meeting. To ensure the smooth running of the meeting, I ask that nobody calls out from the back of the room during the proceedings. In accordance with the public speaking protocols of the meeting, those who have registered to speak will be able to address the meeting for their allotted time. If there is any disruption of the proceedings and the committee is not respected, it may be necessary to temporarily adjourn the meeting. Finally, can I welcome members of the public to the meeting? Those of you who have registered to speak, I will call you forward when it is your turn to make your contribution. Members of the committee may ask you questions of clarification, so please remain at the microphone until after members' questions. The microphone is turned on by pressing the button on the base of the unit, and a timer will appear on the screen to remind you of your remaining time. Now we turn to the agenda. Now, do we have any apologies and deputy members, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies for absence received from Councillor Vivian Atchwell, with Councillor Pett deputising. Thank you.
Welcome, Councillor Pett. Members, do we have any disclosures of interest for today's meeting, please? Councillor Small.
Yes, item number 8 is in my ward, and I also live in the village. I've not talked to anybody about it.
No issues.
No.
Okay, Daniel. Anybody else? Councillor Lee.
Yes, for item 6, just to be aware that I am a trustee of the Winchester Action on Climate Crisis. I have taken no part at any stage about this application with that particular group.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in relation to item 7, this property is in my ward, but I have not been any way involved in the proposals.
You, Councillor Laming.
Yes, the first item 6 is in my ward, but I've taken no part in this whatsoever.
Good. Thank you very much, members. That's good to clarify all those items. Now we move to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of January, and those minutes are on pages 9 to 14. Are those agreed, members? Thank you very much. And we now move to business items. And the first thing to do is to accept the addendum sheet onto the agenda. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. And the first item the first application before us today is land south of Crabwood, Sarum Road, the application for a solar farm. And our officer presenting is Stephen Cornwall. So over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would draw members' attention to the late update, which reports 2 further documents received from the applicant. The first one is with regard to the biodiversity net gain calculation, which as a result of the additional landscaping, the habitat unit has been raised up to 81%. That's plus 81%, obviously. The hedgerow unit calculation remains unchanged. The second document is a briefing paper which the applicant circulated to members, which is simply outlining information which is contained within the report and in the application generally. We haven't proposed, therefore, to report the full contents of that briefing paper. It has been noted that I need to make several adjustments to the planning conditions. Conditions number 14 and 27, which relates to the landscape ecological mitigation plan. In conditions 14 and 27, it should refer to revision M and not revision plan L. I also need to adjust in condition 27, which sets out the biodiversity net gain figures in item A in terms of the achievements of objectives. The 79.27% figure needs uprating to 81% to reflect the updated information. So, Chair, I'll go through the slides. I'm conscious there are a large number of them, so I will do it as quickly as I possibly can, but hopefully making it clear to members what I'm looking to get across. So the application in front of us is for a 20 megawatt solar farm scheme, 40-year operational life. The scheme would then be decommissioned and the land returns back to agriculture. The applicant indicates that approximately 4,700 homes per year could derive their power from the scheme. So the application site is 24 hectares in size, in some ways relatively small for a solar scheme, 5.4 kilometres west of the city centre. When we were out on site yesterday, I made reference to members of how the Red Line application site has been extended. This plan shows those details in full. Members can see down Fairley Mount Road. It includes the whole of the hedgerow and also on a large section of Sparsholt Road. This is a plan showing the overall site. The scheme consists of 6 elements which are outlined in the report, so I won't repeat them here. This is a focus on the entrance and the position for the proposed 2 substations, which was our first stop yesterday. The proposed compound for the 2 substations would be located behind that vegetation. This is one of the buildings, the customer substation, and the second building is the network operator substation. The compound would be enclosed in a security fence, which is typical, and as I indicated on site, the surrounding area would be planted. This is a section of the existing track that goes around the eastern edge of the group of buildings and the vegetation that currently form Pitdown Farm. That track terminates and the intention is to continue it on up parallel to this belt of trees up to the point where the solar farm would, or the main site for the solar farm and the solar arrays would be located, which is in this area where I'm identifying with the cursor. The site is roughly rectangular in shape. The dimensions are approximately 350 meters from north to south and approximately 360 meters north to south and approximately 550 meters east to west. Obviously, it contains the supporting infrastructure which are positioned in this central valley area. As with all these facilities, it's contained within a 2-meter deer fence. There are also CCTV cameras spaced out along the fence line. If I just go back to this plan, members may be able to see the dots along the boundaries, which are actually the positions where the CCTV cameras would be located. The panels themselves are standard, they're fixed in position, maximum height at the back, 3.1 meters. This is a plan of the indicative transformer, which would occupy that central area I referred to. This plan shows the 2 standoffs from the boundaries. We looked at these during the site visit. On the north side, which is the top slide, there's a 10-meter scrub belt to be planted along the boundary to Sarum Road. And then there would be a 16.8 meter seeded area before the fence line. And the first panel is a further 6 meters in from the boundary fence. The second cross section shows a section through from the conifer woodland where we stood on the edge of the field yesterday. Again, there's a 10-meter tree belt to be planted on this boundary, and there's a 40-meter seeded grassland area before you reach the perimeter fence. So this is a photograph taken from approximately the position where we stepped through the boundary from the woodland onto the field, although this obviously was taken last summer when the field had a crop growing in it. So the following photographs I took from the southwest corner of the application site, and they basically start off looking back along the boundary towards Sarum Road, and then panning round. There's the depression in the centre. There's the area looking more eastward. You can see in the centre there, that's the tree belt where the roadway is running up the other side. So the site boundary is, as it were, running approximately along the line where the cursor is, and then up the field towards the Sarum Road boundary. This shows that central area with Pitdown Farm more clearly, and then panning around again closer towards the south. You can just make out the entrance to the site, which is down in that corner. And finally, panning further around, this shows the little downland plantation, which is above the entrance on Farley Mount Road. And finally, this is catching the southern edge of the plantation. Obviously, those views were taken from a position which isn't available to members of the public. So, excluding the immediate location, it's officers' view that there are limited opportunities to look back towards the site. And this plan is identifying the application site with the star and is including the public footpath network south of the site. And you'll notice that the first public footpath south of the site is this one, where the cursor is. There are obviously substantial footpaths to the north of the site. But again, it's emphasizing the main views are from the public highway network from the south and southeast. So one of the members asked about the agricultural land classification yesterday, and this is the plan that's submitted with the application as part of the agricultural soil classification. The application site that we're considering is the line where the cursor is. The area to the east where I'm pointing out at the moment, was excluded on the grounds that there were interesting or potential for interesting archaeological features. So this area of grade 2 land, which is still within the application site, consists of 14%. I do beg your pardon. Consists of yes, indeed, 14% of the site is grade 2, which represents 3.1 hectares. The majority of the site is grade 3B, the majority being 86%, which is 19 hectares. This is a plan showing the construction routing for HGV vehicles. As part of the scheme, there's a proposal for a construction traffic management plan. So the application site is identified where the cursor is. So the intention is the vehicles would come on that route to get to the site. Officers are also proposing, as part of a further planning condition, that measures are agreed to encourage general employees to utilise this route rather than go on any of the other local roads which aren't, as we observed yesterday, are limited in width in certain places. This plan shows us the heritage designations and the environmental designations. The nearest grade 2 listed property, Crabwood Farmhouse, is approximately 1.2 kilometres away from the site. The nearest scheduled monument, 1 kilometre to the west. The site itself carries no landscape designations, but the land to the north does. The woodlands are ancient woodlands, and just jump on. This area of the woodland is a site of special scientific interest, and the hatched area is a site of importance for nature conservation. Members will note that the report has taken all those factors into account, and there are various conditions to safeguard those areas. The next few slides are showing the viewpoints which the applicants submitted. These are where the viewpoints were taken from. I'll now move through them. This is year 1 from down at Forley Mount Road at the access point. It does exclude, move on to year 10, which is showing an element of growth within the southern boundary edge. It should be remembered that this view doesn't include the proposed section of hedgerow, which would be planted on the north side of the access track, which is considered that would further assist in screening the site. This is a view from partway on Sparshot Road. We didn't stop at this location for obvious reasons. It is more open to view. Again, year 10, the hedgerow is developing. Again, it is worth noting that this is one of the hedgerow gaps that the red line, the extended red line, is intended to address. So this will be planted up. And obviously by year 10, the potential to see this view would have been reduced. This is a plan of a photograph taken of the western end of Enmill Lane. Again, we didn't stop here yesterday for obvious reasons. The site would be partially in view from this position. And because Enmill Road does rise as it leaves Sparshot Road, it obviously, even if the hedgerow on the side of Sparshot Road was raised, it's unlikely that that view would be completely removed. This is a view from the Sparshot Road, Soham Road crossroads where we stopped yesterday. That's the year 1 view. Year 2, the projection is that the view of the panels themselves would be screened. And again, the intention is for a hedgerow to be planted where there's obviously this gap on the boundary of on the eastern boundary of the field. This is a view from Beechcroft Tea Rooms, year 1 and year 10. So the vegetation on the eastern and southern boundaries is obviously developing, but because of the change in topography, the view of the majority of the main solar panel site would still remain in view. Obviously, this plan isn't showing the 10-meter tree belt to the Sparshot Road boundary, or indeed the fact that both the southern hedgerow and the eastern hedgerow have been enhanced to 5 meters in depth. But it's unlikely that those factors would override the visual impact because of the difference in ground levels. So this is a photograph that I took down Sarum Road obviously during the summer. Sarum Road has a distinct character. It was a Roman road. Again, that factor or those factors have been incorporated into the considerations in the report. So this is a view from Sarum Road looking towards the main application site in the summer months, reflected by the leaves on the vegetation. And this is also taken in the summer. It's actually the corner of the site as it abuts Sarum Road. And members can just see the start of the conifer woodland that we walked through yesterday on the right-hand side of this photograph. These are the visualizations the applicant presented from Sarum Road, taken from the Clarendon Way, year 1 in the summer, year 10 in the summer. These are the 2 viewpoints I didn't include in the handout yesterday. As members will appreciate, they show, if you look between the 2, it's very difficult to discern any difference. And planting, or rather copying them at A4 size, I didn't feel would have provided any particular assistance yesterday. What we did do yesterday is observe the transparency of the boundary on the south side of Sarum Road. This is a photograph I took previously from Clarendon Way, looking across vegetation towards the application site. And again, this is a photograph taken from a position standing on Sarum Road itself. So as I've indicated earlier, the intention would be for a 10-meter scrub belt to be planted beyond the vegetation that members can see. Chairman, the recommendation in front of members is that subject to a legal agreement and to the conditions as set out in the report and as adjusted, as I outlined at the beginning of the meeting, the recommendation would be for approval. Thank you.
Very much, Stephen. Now we turn to public speaking. First of all, we have 2 objectors, Sam Culhane and Rachel Waldron. Would you like to come forward, please? Have you agreed between you how you're going to share your 3 minutes? Lovely. Okay, well, when you're ready, the timer will show you how much time you have left. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I live, own and operate our family farm and farm shop next door and opposite to the proposed solar farm in Hursley Parish. I appreciate more than anyone the need as a farmer to create different income streams in order to operate a financially viable business. However, I also appreciate the overriding responsibility as landowners we have to manage our farm in a way that is sustainable for food production and sympathetic to the surrounding area. After all, we are unable to replicate or replace our precious countryside. There is no alternative to farmland for food production or a sustainable environment. The proposed site is in a very rural, visually sensitive location, the most green belt you can get. As a farmer, I witness the effect of climate change every day. However, the best response to an emergency is a strategic and calm response. Constructing solar farms in an ad hoc manner in the middle of the productive countryside is not a considered approach. Current government agricultural policy is encouraging us to enrich our farms to increase wildlife habitats. This can only be achieved through maintaining a functioning countryside that is not disrupted or compromised by industrialisation, such as solar farms. As a fourth generation of my family to farm at Beechcroft, we've always appreciated the unspoilt countryside views. When we opened our tea barn and began sharing those views with the public, this was reinforced. This has become a unique selling point to our business. There are more suitable, more efficient locations for a solar farm. Is it reasonable that the unique selling point of one business should be taken away by another when there are alternatives available?
The visual impact of this development on the natural beauty of the countryside will be enormous, negating the public's enjoyment of an area used by thousands as a respite from the city and the stress of everyday life. It will industrialise the countryside, changing the landscape's character. It does not appear that other sites, including on the landowner's property, have been seriously considered as workable, less intrusive options. If connectivity to the grid is so important, why does the proposed site need over a kilometre of cabling to reach the substations? This proposal is a simple, commercial, for-profit venture undertaken by the developer and landowner. The efficacy of solar developments in reaching global, not just local, net zero targets has still to be proven. The proposed screening will break up the sweeping open views of the countryside, whilst being ineffective even when mature, as you've seen from the pictures, as the site will be on elevated, undulating ground, which is against government policy, and therefore always visible. There are opportunities to address both climate change and to continue to safeguard the incredibly rich, important and beautiful countryside so close to Winchester by siting green energy generation in appropriate locations. This proposed site is a rural, non-industrialised area of natural beauty and should remain as such. Thank you.
And many congratulations on your timing.
We practiced.
Well done. Thank you. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for our objectors? No? Many thanks. You were very clear. Thank you. You may return to your seats. Next, we have two parish council representatives, and you will have 3 minutes each. So first, we have Councillor Sue Wood from Sparsholt. If you'd like to come forward, Sue. You know the routine. And you will have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Just take your time. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. I'm Sue Wood and I'm the Chair of Sparsholt Parish Council. Let's be honest about this application. It's from a commercial company working with a private farmer to exploit the council's declaration of a climate emergency. It's not a public body working in the public interest with only public benefits. The location has been selected because it's near a pylon in a field where the owner is prepared to have the installation. The proposed site is on the highest point of undulating and valued landscape, which would change it from an agricultural view to an industrial one. No amount of mitigation can compensate for this loss. The case officers and the WCC's own landscape expert and CPRE Hampshire all agree that this is valued landscape. The CPR planning statement made available to the committee clearly sets out the environmental and planning policy reasons for rejection of this application on this particular site. The National Planning Policy Framework states that valued landscapes should be protected. It is therefore obvious that the site is inappropriate, and there have been hundreds of members of the public also objecting to the inappropriate location whilst being supportive of solar electricity generation. As stated in the officer's report, the application conflicts with policies CP20 and DM23. It also conflicts with policy MTRA4, as a countryside location is not required. The justification for overriding these conflicts is an unquantified and therefore subjective view of public benefit, while undervaluing public harm. What is the point of having planning policies if they can be so lightly and subjectively discarded? The same or greater public benefit could be achieved without the public harm, and the WCC as the planning authority are encouraged to reject this proposal and put strenuous effort into ensuring future secure renewable energy production in a more appropriate, less harmful and sustainable locations. The impact on the landscape to meet energy goals should not be used to justify the wrong development in the wrong location. Supporters of solar farms in any place and at any cost will erode support among the general public for carbon zero schemes. Protecting the global environment is not an excuse to trash the local environment. Councillors, please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for the Parish Council representative chair? Councillor Lee, thank you.
Thank you for that passionate overview of your concerns. Have you seen and looked at the conditions? Are there any of those conditions that you think ameliorate what is proposed?
Sorry, Councillor Wood, could you use the microphone? Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, sorry. Particularly the mitigation ones, if you looked at the photographs that we saw that Stephen showed the people, I couldn't see any difference between year 1 and year 10. So that's one of the reasons that I don't think there's enough planting or consideration given to it. And if your own landscape people are also saying the same thing, surely you should be listening to them.
Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Wood. I think that's covered everything. Thank you. And next we have Councillor Bell from Hursley Parish Council. Again, you know the routine very well, Councillor Bell. Thank you. You will have 3 minutes when you start speaking. Thank you.
I'm speaking on behalf of Hursley Parish Council. Hursley Parish Council supports this application for a solar farm on land south of Crabwood. We are aware that the proposal is controversial and even that those in favour of solar often prefer them to be placed on rooftops or on brownfield land. However, even using larger roofs or car parks, rooftop solar does not have the efficiencies and economies of scale of a solar farm feeding straight to the grid. This array is relatively small in comparison to others in the district, and grid capacity is limited. Winchester City Council has set an ambitious target to achieve zero carbon, and at parish level, we encourage our residents to use low energy solutions. Some years ago, Hursley Parish welcomed a solar array at Ladwell, which is barely visible to passing traffic. The current proposal is on south sloping open land and will be visible, only minimally through hedgerows, but more prominently from the Sarum Road junction and Beechcroft Farm and Shop. It will not be visible to walkers on the Clarendon Way or from the woodland north of Sarum Road. Hampshire Ecology has found there will be minimal impact on the nearby SSSIs and has set out conditions by which biodiversity of the site can be improved. We endorse those conditions. Similarly, Winchester Archaeology does not raise objection but requires careful management at the time of construction to ensure any possible relics are preserved. Winchester Landscape does raise objections, citing the historic landscape of grassland. We understand these concerns but feel that they do not outweigh the benefit to the local area of an opportunity to generate green energy. Local organisations have taken a keen interest in this proposal, WINAC, which supports it enthusiastically, and CPRE, which objects strongly. Our adjoining parish, Sparshot, objects, saying it should be placed elsewhere, but the site was chosen applying strict criteria on land quality, proximity to the grid, and existing vehicle access roads and tracks. The solar panels will not be visible from anywhere in Sparshot Parish except the junction of Sarum Road and Sparshot Road. The property most impacted by the proposal is Beechcroft Farm Shop, which has an outdoor seating area well used by walkers and cyclists, with a clear view to the solar farm. The array is now smaller than that originally proposed and further away. We had asked if it could be placed at the bottom of the slope, but were advised that land quality there would not be eligible. We hope that once installed, the array will not be as prominent as feared, and that Beechcroft customers may even welcome this green energy solution. Having weighed the arguments of Hampshire and Winchester councils and those of local organisations, Hursley Parish Council concludes that it supports the application, including the important conditions as shown.
Very much, Councillor Bell. Do we have any questions of clarification for Councillor Bell? Councillor Lee, your microphone's still on, if you could switch it off. No? Thank you very much, Councillor Bell. You may return to your seat. Thank you. Next, we have the ward councillor, adjacent ward, Councillor Caroline Horrell. Councillor Horrell, you will have 5 minutes when you're ready, and you know the routine. Thank you very much.
Chair, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to address the committee. Committee members, do we all agree with the development of solar energy in our climate emergency efforts? I'm sure the answer is yes. But do we all agree solar farms should be placed anywhere in our district? Surely the answer is no. A clear issue with this application is the landscape in which the site is located. The case officer, our own WCC landscape team and CPRE Hampshire all agree that the site is within a valued landscape, being one which demonstrates attributes beyond the ordinary. I think that's an important fact. We know that this area was used extensively during COVID. Why was that? Because it offered open downland, an extensive network of footpaths used for recreational purposes such as walking, cycling and horse riding. The Clarendon Way, a walking route that links two beautiful cathedral cities, runs along the road adjacent to the site. And also adjacent to the site is Crabwood, a site of scientific interest with its ancient woodland. We are blessed. How can you possibly consider harming this wonderful place when a perfectly suitable alternative location for the solar farm exists elsewhere on the farm? In fact, it's even closer to the key commercial driver, a pylon connected to the national grid. Why would you allow development which is contrary to CP20, where it states we should be preserving tranquility, a sense of place and setting? Or DM23, which says visual intrusion should be minimised and that development should not detract from the enjoyment of the countryside. Contrary to the officer's report, I believe that the planning balance ought to favour refusal. If we follow our own local plan policies for the protection of the countryside and MPPF guidance, we would do that. The MPPF paragraph 180A states that valued landscapes should be protected. Surely this requirement should mandate a presumption against a large development of this type within a valued landscape. Otherwise, it's hard to envisage any circumstance in which the countryside of our district outside of the national park will be protected in the face of any solar farm applications. MTRA4, our own policy covering development in the countryside, states proposed development should not cause harm to the character and landscape of the area or neighbouring uses. I cannot see how this proposal does not fail on this policy alone. It is proposed this large solar farm would be located on an elevated and open part of the landscape, which our own officers agree would start to change this valued landscape from agriculture to one with industrial type and function. Indeed, has this application applied for the change of use from agriculture to one of an industrial function? Screening of the solar panels will not mitigate the impact of the development on the landscape itself. Instead, it would block the public enjoyment of this high quality and sensitive landscape from Sarum Road, Sparshot Road, Beechcroft Farm, and homes on Sarum Road, which can see the site and are in the Sparshot parish. Councillors, have you considered the detrimental impact on the livelihood of the family at Beechcroft and the economic harm that may follow? A tea room with amazing views across the beautiful countryside might be blighted by the field of 3-metre high solar panels. Are we harming their economic prosperity? Do you know enough to confirm that this will not be the case? Councillors, I urge you to refuse this application as currently proposed and not ignore our very clear planning policies and indeed national guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Horrell. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for the councillor? No? Thank you very much. You may return to your seat. Thank you. And now we turn to our supporters, Nicola Jones and Chris Field. If you'd like to come forward. You have 3 minutes between you. Do you know how you're going to be sharing that time? Okay, lovely. Well, from when you start speaking, you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important application. My name is Nicola Jones, and I'm the Planning Manager for Enova. 2023 was confirmed as the warmest year on record, with average global temperatures nearly 1.5 degrees warmer than 1990 levels, and the UK government committed at COP28 to triple renewables by 2030. The Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, with a target to become a carbon neutral district by 2030. As noted within your office's report, while many renewable projects were facing long delays connecting to the grid, this solar farm can be connected this year. It is impossible to ignore climate change impacts and the need to tackle the climate emergency. Indeed, in the DEFRA UK Food Security Report, identified that the biggest threat to food security in the UK is in fact climate change. Your officers have provided a very thorough assessment of our application, weighing up the limited impacts of this fully reversible development against the significant benefits, concluding that the application sufficiently accords with the development plan and policies. I don't wish to repeat the details you've already heard, but would like to emphasise these key benefits to members before the debate. The site is not only positioned outside of designated landscapes, but also away from community areas. The solar farm will deliver on-site biodiversity net gain, with 81.5% for habitat units and 63% for hedgerow units. This value has increased as set out today due to thorough analysis and iteration of the landscaping plan. The site has been selected based on the availability of a grid connection, available land, and land free of national and local plan designations. The site comprises of only 3% of the landowner's holding, where the remaining 97% will continue its agricultural use, helping to diversify and support ongoing farming. The site comprises 86% of non-best and most versatile land. The area which amounts to only 0.1% of Grade 2 land in Winchester. As stated within your officer's report, this is considered to be relatively insignificant, and Natural England have not objected. National Policy Statement EN3 states use of BMV land does not prohibit development of solar arrays. To conclude, our application presents a real opportunity to significantly reduce carbon emissions and to help tackle climate change. We have worked with your planning officer, statutory consultees, and comments received by the public to provide the revised proposals. The project has support from local Winchester residents, and as stated within your officer's report, any harm is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you'll support your officer's recommendation for approval for a site which could be generating renewable energy by the end of 2024.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions or clarification for the supporters? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to explore the actual location of the arrays, which has been mentioned this morning. Why have we chosen that particular aspect? From my reading, I think there's some indication that the generation in terms of watts per square metre might be better because of the shape of the topography. So if you could just unpick that for me. I'm just wondering again, is the height of the arrays, does it have to be at 3 meters? Can it be lower? And if so, what would be the impact of that, please?
Could you use your microphone, please? And Councillor Lee, if you could switch yours off temporarily, thank you.
So in terms of the topography of the land, the south-facing element of it means that we can essentially be a lot more efficient in our land use there. So with a south-facing slope, it allows us to reduce our row spacings in between the panels. So because if you imagine with the slope, the shadow effect from the back of the panels or the top of the panels is less when it's on a slope. If you had on a completely flat site, you would have increased shading from the back of the panels. So which means you then be taking up more land area for the same amount of power generation.
And what about the height of the arrays?
Yes, so the height of the array, that's what you now look at as an industry standard, the 3 meters. You'll see that was almost universal across all solar applications within the UK. The reason for that is that you then have about a 1 meter gap from the base of the lowest panel to the ground, which allows maintenance and underneath it, if you're looking after the land underneath it, it also means that especially on this, we're looking at the grassland planting. It gives it enough space to grow efficiently to maintain those BNG benefits that we're looking at for this project.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, a couple of questions. The first is there can be a problem with runoff from these. When you have a very intense storm with a shiny, smooth surface, the runoff starts instantly. When you compare it with pasture land, and even more so if you have woodland. And where I live in Alresford, there's a site there close to the A31, and there have been flooding problems from this, with the water running off and coursing down the side of the road. And I wonder if that issue had been addressed. And the other question would be, I noticed that sheep are mentioned for grazing underneath. And that seems to me, it's often put forward as a additional use of the land. But actually, I've never actually seen sheep on a solar farm. And if you don't have sheep grazing, you then have a major maintenance issue of stopping saplings and scrub coming up.
So on the first point on the runoff, the panels on this site do have small gaps between them and the centre row. So they won't all be channeled to the end of the panel. The 4 panels, it could drop off in the middle as well. And we've also done infiltration testing on site, and the flood risk assessment sets out that we'll do check dams, which are sort of small dams as the gradient goes down to capture any runoff which goes down the valley area. They're proposed mitigation on that. And then on the sheep grazing, there are a number of sites that have sheep on them. They may just not have been suitable on solar farms, which you may have seen around Winchester. I'm not quite sure on the other ones. But we are facilitating sheep grazing on this site with the proposed planting of the grassland sward in the main array area. And we're trying to confirm details with the landowner.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just clarify the word glare has been mentioned? I was always under the impression that we've been told at a meeting like this before, that if there's a glare on the panel, then the panel's not working correctly. Is that correct?
They are designed to be more matte in colour to absorb as much light as possible. But I know the green glare was mentioned within the glint and glare addendum, and that is a low intensity glint with a low potential to perform a temporary after image, so the sort of dark blur that you get, and that is considered to be acceptable. And I think on this site it is only about 20 hours a year that it's meant to occur, and it's at very acceptable low levels.
Could you, how many alternative sites have you explored prior to concentrating on this one that were possibly even closer to a supply connection than the standalone system that you're proposing on this application?
Yeah, so as a business, we're very much led by where there's grid availability. So we initially go out to the DNO, in this case SSE, to ascertain where we can connect into their network. Some of you may be aware Winchester is a very constrained area, which is why you haven't had the amount of solar applications that other areas of the country have had. We take a view across that a section of the line where SSE can tell us we can connect into, and we'll narrow down our options there based on what we believe to be a suitable planning area from a planning perspective. So in this case particularly, we spoke to another number of landowners along the route, and the area we've settled on is one that works with a landowner. We believe it's within his land holding, one of the least productive areas of the land. And if you sort of follow the land further west and south, the overhead line west and south, you then going into more areas of grassland. But for this particular situation, solar panels are not compatible with dairy grazing because of the size of the cattle. It would mean that any solar development would mean loss of dairy output on this farm.
So in numbers, how many other sites?
I don't know that. We can clarify afterwards, but normally we look at points of connection rather than sites, if that makes sense. So we would have looked along the I don't know the numbers.
That was my original question, that possibly closer to a connection point than you've got at the moment.
There certainly might be theoretically ones, but we are looking at this from a commercial buy. This is a commercial endeavour. So we're looking at this from landowners that are able and are willing to enter into this sort of development with us. And that, whilst you may find elsewhere in the district, you might find somewhere that from a planning perspective might work, but it still has to work commercially, still has to work with the landowner, it still has to work with the grid. And this is what we believe we have here is the best available opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. We have to deal with the application before us, don't we? So, are there any more questions of clarification? Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me what the height is from the ground to the bottom of the solar panels?
It's between 0.8 metres and 1 metre high at the lowest point.
Are you sure that that's sufficient for sheep to get underneath?
Yes.
Because they are rather silly animals at best of time.
Yes, that's what we have on a lot of our sites where there's sheep underneath as well. That accounts for them to move freely.
You're putting them fairly close together as well, so it makes it difficult when one gets on its back to actually come along and rescue it.
We do have the internal access tracks where our maintenance will be going in, and the farmer with the sheep will also have access to maintain the sheep within there.
Yeah, but I mean, when you put sheep under solar panels, it's extremely difficult to round them up and control them. So that's one point. The second point is, how do you actually going to prepare the soil for the wildflower seeds, which is part of your environmental assessment?
I believe that the land is ploughed to a short level and then the seeds are implemented.
Yeah, but wildflowers need a very nutrient poor, whereas that land has been ploughed and cropped for many, many years, so it's very high in nutrients. So therefore, you're going to get a much lower level of increase in biodiversity.
We have got a number of conditions which requires that within at least the first 5 years, we'll have to be reseeding anything which doesn't establish. And also there's the LEMP condition, which requires us to do ongoing maintenance. But the species, the mix of seed for the wildflower that we selected on the landscaping plan is meant to be more native, and our consultants looked into the nutrient density of the soil and the clayness of it. So we have taken into that account with the species mix that we've put onto our landscaping plan.
So you're going to control the areas within the site that the sheep can go, because otherwise sheep really do like wildflowers.
The wildflowers are positioned outside of the fence line, so the sheep will be positioned within the solar array area, and the wildflower areas are in the buffer areas between the boundaries of the site and the fence line, so they won't have access to the wildflower meadows.
Okay, and when we're looking at some of the patterns in the height of the summer, because they're really dark, you get a lot of heat absorption into them. So how are you going to deal with the reflection of that onto the soil underneath?
As in, how does the grass grow underneath?
Yeah,
because
it's going to be fairly starved of light, so therefore you've got to consider that part as well.
I think that's been covered, Councillor Laming, by the spaces between the.
I'm still in the papers, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Laming. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. Our officer earlier on referred to the soil quality and grades and crops, etc. I'm aware, of course, that there is no national policy or guidance on food security. However, I do have two questions I would like to have answers to. The first one is, what main and rotational crops were grown in this field when it was last?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What main and rotational crops were grown in this field when was the
Councillor
last
Cunningham?
crop?
I don't think this is relevant.
Yes, it
to
is.
this
Background
application.
information. Background information. It's been raised by our officer. So I'm following up. Thank you.
I don't think the applicants will know that anyway. We can ask the officer when it comes to officer questions, if that's okay.
Will the officer be in a position to answer the question?
Well, we'll find out. Do you have a question for the applicants?
Yes. What tonnage did or does this field produce per annum? And is the UK self-sufficient in these crops, or would this amount have to be imported?
That's another question for the officer, whether or not it's relevant, I'm not entirely sure.
It is relevant, I can assure you.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick technical question. We can see from the documents you submitted that the CCTV camera poles also contain what looks like a loudhailer, described as a loudspeaker. Now, I know we have a condition which would limit the overall cumulative sound output, but can you tell us a little bit more about under what circumstances, for what purpose, and how often these loudspeakers around the perimeter might be used?
So they're generally used if there are any persons on site which aren't authorised. Those cameras are monitored off-site, and if we see those persons on site, we can give them a verbal warning that we know that they're there and that we will be contacting appropriate persons to come bring them off-site or for them to leave. So that's the only purposes of which they would be used, and it would be someone speaking sort of like this over there. So the noise level would be quite low. and we would still have to be, as you say, in compliance with that condition where we can't be over 30 decibels.
Thank you very much. So we can assume that they would not be automatically triggered by animals, for example.
No. So it's just the CCTV monitor off-site, and we'll only trigger that when there's authorised persons on there.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? You sent us this this information sheet which the officers referred to. I know it's not a material planning matter, but I just wanted to raise for the community. You've made a community promise on here of up to £5,000 per annum to the local community and £2,000 to a charitable donation. Could I ask, is that guaranteed? Is that subject to the amount of electricity that's generated? And how is that going to be paid and guaranteed to the community?
So the fund, as you say, initially our approach is that we go directly to the host parish council for the benefit fund. However, through the consultation and during the determination phase as well, Sparshot have highlighted that they would like to be entered in for part of that fund, which Hersley have also accepted as well or are aware of. And after there is a decision on the site, we would then approach both to confirm the appropriate split of the funds. And then that is an annual payment after the site is constructed and connected to the grid, so once it's operating. And we basically approach the council, both councils, probably after the decision's made to confirm that and then firm up exactly who it's paid to and when it's paid per annum to those parties.
Thank you. It's good to have that clarified. Okay, any more questions or clarification, members? No? Thank you very much indeed for your time. Okay, we now turn back to our planning officer, Mr. Cornwall. Do you have anything to add following the public contributions, Stephen, please?
I don't, Chairman, other than I would just make the observation with regard to the last point you raised about the fund, that we've covered that issue in the report and it's not given any weight in the planning recommendation in front of members today. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise that so it was in the public arena, really. Okay. So, members, I'm prepared to take questions on the whole report. If you could just refer to the page that you are referring to. If we could remember, we went on a site visit, as the officer pointed out yesterday, to most of us, I think, to see the site. And various questions were asked then, so perhaps we could start with the questions that were asked on the site visit. Councillor Small, we'll start with you.
Thank you. We were talking yesterday about the fencing that was going to go around the site. I was just looking at the diagram and the deer fence. Is that what you called it? On page 95. Did you say it's going to be raised from the ground to allow small mammals to go underneath?
Yes, the common practice, and it is in the detail on the plan, that the fence would be approximately, there'd be 115mm gap at the bottom underneath the fence to allow small mammals to move in and out of the site. In addition, there would also be a number of gates for larger mammals such as badgers to also move in and out of the site.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 82 and page 78, landscape enhancements, para 14 and 27. Going to the landscape ecological management plan, it talks about the applicant will provide that plan once the site starts to generate energy. Can I ask, why is it written that way? Why can't the plan be written before the site is commissioned? In other words, I'm in my mind, as we discussed on site, there are sight lines, there are gaps in hedges, there is a need to get on and get the mitigating sort of fencing and green growth in place as soon as possible. Time lags like this, I don't think are very helpful. We've heard from the public that, this is unacceptable, given sightlines and arguably a lot on the landscape. So can we do something better to advance this and get the consideration much earlier on in the process?
Chair,
Councillor
Really?
Lee, can you just switch off your microphone? It just makes it clearer. Thank you.
this is obviously looking at the trigger point for condition 14.
Well,
Is it?
yeah, 14 says shall be implemented within the first planting season following the first export of power. And then you go to Paris 27, and it suggests that once they start generating the site energy, then the landscape and ecology management plan will be expected to be drawn up. Why, I don't understand why we can't draw up the plans. If we are to approve the planning application today, they can get on and start that plan and submit it as soon as possible rather than delay.
Great, thank you. So we already have the details of the proposed planting scheme that would be implemented, which is on the landscape enhancement mitigation plan. So condition 14, with the adjustment I outlined at the beginning of the meeting, is intended to trigger the planting all around the site. As we heard from the applicant this morning, it's their intention, or rather they've got the ability to connect by the end of this year. And they've in discussions I've had with them, they've indicated it is their intention to implement, to achieve that. And therefore the next planting season that we're faced with, which is November through to March 2025, is effectively the next possible opportunity that they would have to plant. So that condition would effectively get the planting in place at the earliest opportunity. Condition 27 is looking at the more long-term management beyond the initial planting phase, getting us through up until the end of the life of the site after 40 years. Because obviously we're conscious that we need mechanisms in place to ensure that the planting continues to flourish and seeks, together with the grasslands, seeks to achieve the biodiversity net gain levels that we've been given to understand the scheme will bring forward.
Yeah, thank you. And the other point I raised on the site yesterday, and I think we know the answer to this, that it's all going to take time. It's 8 to 10 years to get some worthwhile growth and screening in place. So the question I would ask is, are there any opportunities to speed that up by certain choices that the ecological officer, I guess, might have some other thoughts on that, or has that been considered and, it is what it is?
Well, we've obviously considered the species type to be representative of what's found in the area. I don't want to steal Councillor Reid's thunder because we were talking before the meeting, but there has been a discussion this morning in terms of water availability to the plant seems to be the critical factor that will encourage its continued growth. And if members wish, we could introduce reference to water schedule to water the plants in clearly periods of drought. For example, if we go through dry summer periods, that would be a significant advantage to promoting the retention and further growth of the plants. And that would go in conditions 14 and 27.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, did you want to propose that?
I did, Chair. Can I just say I'm rather surprised that you're going to go through this as a total report. 98 pages will be flipping paper backwards and forwards like a yo-yo. But that is the decision that you've made. First question I had was the composition of the proposed new track. which there are no details within the report of how it's going to be constructed. The other one I asked was the distance from the actual solar panels themselves to the substation, the distance, and then the distance from the substation back to the power line. Those are the two real questions that I'd asked at the day.
You'd also like to add to the conditions a watering condition.
Well, I think we've got to bear in mind, Chair, that we're not in discussion, but yes.
Yes.
We do need to cover that.
No, I
because
agree. I agree. And I think that's
the photographs show very little growth in the first 10 years. So I believe our landscape are saying 20 years, then you'll get a substantial growth. But we're accepting 10 years as a possibility that it's going to cover most of it, but we all know it's not. But we're into discussion now, which we shouldn't be.
Stephen?
Chair, the distance from the solar arrays back down to the substations is, I believe, 1,100 meters. The route, as we discussed yesterday, comes down the centre of the field, cables buried, and then also down a section of the existing track. The distance back to the connection point to the grid, I don't have that specific dimension because that element of the link isn't part of the application we're being asked to consider this morning. The applicants indicated that the distribution network operator would form that link using permitted development rights. Looking at the plan, I believe it's probably in the region of 300 meters back from the substation position.
Is the construction of the rest of the track?
Because it's not part of the application, we don't have the precise details in whether the installation of the link back to the pylon would follow the existing track.
No, I'm sorry. I think Councillor Reid wanted to know what the composition of the extension of the existing track up to the solar array, how that would be.
Chair, the Councillor Reid's just pointed to the drawing I've got in front of me. The large, shall I find the slide, and that might assist the rest of the members so they know what Councillor Reid and I are talking about. So Councillor Reid indicates to me he's looking for this double line running down the centre of the site. That's the route for the underground cable. It's the underground cable. That section back down to the road is 750 meters in length. And then obviously the cable would continue underground down an element of the existing track that we observe runs up to the group of farm buildings at the moment.
Councillor Reid.
That leads to the other question which I asked the applicant with regard to how many other locations had been explored. Now, this is quite normal with all of this type of application that we explore around, and it should form part of the report. It doesn't form any part of this report.
I think that was covered by the applicant when you asked that question, but I'll ask Daniel, is that something that we?
It's more of a policy consideration, I think, and Stephen probably will be better placed because in the actual report, he touches upon MTRA4 and CP12 and the issue of whether or not this requires a countryside location or otherwise. And Stephen's probably better placed than I to talk about the policies of MTRA4 and CP12, but the assessment does take into account those policies and conclusions are inevitably drawn upon those points as to one, whether it needs a countryside location or otherwise.
Chair, in the planning consideration section and in the details of the application, we have outlined the factors behind the choice of this site coming forward in the form it's in front of us today. And I'd only be repeating the points.
Yes, indeed.
Made in the
It's
presentation.
in the report, I believe, Councillor Reid.
It
Okay,
isn't.
all right.
Madam Chair, there is an assessment as to whether or not it needs a countryside location. It is in the report, and if Councillor Reid.
I think he was looking for alternative sites that were considered and turned down.
But the point is, the planning officer has made an assessment as to whether or not it needs a countryside location. He's made a conclusion upon his own professional opinion that it can be accommodated by NTRA4. If Councillor Reid disagrees with that, then obviously there's a point about whether or not NTRA4 is correctly engaged or otherwise. But because the officer believes that NTRA4 and the need for this to have a countryside location is met, the other points about other sites would not necessarily be canvassed because in the professional opinion, it needs a countryside location.
It's covered. Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions, I think, for the case officer. The term valued landscape has been used a lot in the report on page 71 and by some of the speakers we've heard this morning. I'm assuming that that is a subjective rather than an objective assessment, because I think I'm correct in saying, as you pointed out in the report, there are no designations that affect the site of the application. And could you just confirm for me that there will be no physical effect of this application on the designated sites on the opposite side of Sarum Road, the SSI and the sink? That's the first point.
Yes, the valued landscape, as I believe in the report, is referenced from the NPPF, which doesn't provide any further guidance in terms of what should constitute a valued landscape. Obviously, we've looked at this carefully, and so as your landscape officer, we do accept the concept that this could qualify as a valued landscape for reasons which are outlined in the report. In terms of impacts on the sites opposite, which obviously carry nature conservation designations rather than any landscape designations, we've assessed the 15-metre separation distance regards to ancient woodlands. We've also looked at the potential impact on the site of special scientific interest, and members will note there's a representation from Natural England who listed a series of criteria they wish to see safeguarded, and they've been included in the report, specifically in the conditions and in the environmental construction management plan. Sorry, the construction environmental management plan condition. So we're content that the scheme will have no impact on those adjoining nature conservation designations.
Councillor Pett, did you have a second question?
If I may, Chair, thank you. Yeah, the second one was just on the on page 68, the economic impact of the application. I wonder if there's been any assessment at all of any economic impact on the tea room by the tea room or by yourself as the case officer, and if that has any material consideration in the case at all.
Chairman, there hasn't been. all the information we've got is what's in front of members today, and in what we've heard from the operators themselves. That's part that led us to the concluding paragraph in that section.
It's in the report, and we did in fact go to visit the cafe yesterday as part of our site visit to see the impact,
Yes, so
potential impact of the.
So the report's concluding that we aren't aware of any compelling evidence to indicate there would be an impact. Therefore, I think the term is we give this little weight in the decision.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Councillor Pett. We have Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether the case officer is going to be able to answer the question for me or not, but could he possibly address the issue of the crops that were grown in the field and when the last crop was actually grown there? And if the loss of this crop, minute or small as it is, would actually result in a loss to the UK of self-sufficiency, and would it have to be imported?
Chair, I couldn't tell you. I know there was a crop in the field last summer, but I couldn't tell you specifically what it was. In terms of this seems to be, if I'm, may say, a question regarding food production or food safeguarding. We're advised in the new NPPF that came out in December, there is a footnote saying we need to have regard or consideration of that factor, and we've done that in the report. So I won't add any more than that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the theme about just looking at some of the issues about nature. We're talking about some skylark plots, and I wonder if you could just clarify for me. I think you said on site yesterday they have been identified. They're off site, but are they available and ready before construction starts? Because obviously nature disturbance is going to, I guess, disturb those birds who may want to move elsewhere.
Yes, the proposal is that 4 skylark plots will be provided elsewhere on the farm estate. The precise location of those is yet to be agreed. What we would do if the application is approved is go forward, because this would need to be subject to the legal agreement with the landowner signing up to this, because clearly he's the party who's going to continue farming, and it would be his farming practices that would need to adjust to make provision for these 4 plots. What we're doing is using the DEFRA guidance as a template to work out the procedures, because the plots need to be a certain distance away from hedgerows or any elevated position where a bird of prey might stop. And they need to be a certain size and managed in a certain way.
So my question, Chair, then is, can that be conditioned? Can we ask the landowner to have those in place before construction starts?
The normal procedure would be to require them to be triggered when the development commences, because clearly that's when the land ceases to be available, as it were, to skylarks.
I think it'll be covered as soon as possible.
Supplementary made very quickly on a slightly different subject, and that is the construction traffic management plan. We discussed on site yesterday, obviously walkers, cyclists, leisure users, and I'm not seeing in the construction traffic management plan a plan to disseminate the routes and the issues that might impinge on their pleasure and use of the vicinity, particularly cyclists on the roads.
Chairman, the construction traffic management plan would limit HGVs, and as we've indicated, we wish to extend that to employees' traffic to the nominated roads. It's not intended for traffic to use the Sorum Road, for example, we've got specific conditions in place that would exclude any accesses onto that road. There is a proposal under condition 16 for the signage details to be agreed, which would warn any other users of the designated routes that they are being used by HTVs. Certainly the section of Burley Mount Road close to the site, there would be banksmen in place to ensure that there continues to be vehicle movement and you don't get two HTVs meeting each other on what we recognise as a narrow road. And I would hope that their presence in the event of a cyclist or walker being on those roads, that banksman would mention to them that they were expecting a large vehicle to come along shortly.
Thank you. Councillor Lamy.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. We have the landscape officer putting an objection in. I'd like to know why your thoughts are that we're going ahead with this rather than listen to what he has to say.
Yes,
this has been covered in the report, Councillor Laming. I mean, it's very clearly both pros and cons are in the report. I don't think, have you got anything to add to what's in the report, Mr. Cornwall? No? Yes, thank you. Your second question, Councillor Laming?
Thank you. As most of these panels have a design life of 25 years, what conditions are we putting in about replacements being put in?
Chair, we don't normally apply conditions in terms of replacements. We just accept that as an everyday operational requirement as and when it would be clearly triggered by some reduction in generating capacity that would be noted at the monitoring station, which, as we know, would be off-site.
The 40-year limit is quite clear.
Yes, Chair, it is. And at the end of that period, everything would be removed from the site. And as members will see, there are conditions down there that require submission of details of that decommissioning process.
Councillor Reid, you have another question?
Yes, just a clarification, if I may, Chair. With regards to the possible change of use of the land, how would this be graded in future years? At the moment it's agricultural, but does this actually turn it into commercial, industrial by this application? Reference has been made several times to this.
So with the grant of the planning permission, ordinarily, if you're applying for a dwelling house, the use would be obviously residential use. So the nature of the actual application itself determines what that use will be, i.e. the installation of photovoltaic panels will be a solar farm. Because it's time limited to a condition and the need to restore the land back to its previous condition, after that it will go back to, one would hope, agricultural use. Anything after that 40-year period, be it the continuation or otherwise, or perhaps installation of barns and so on and so forth, will be determined at that point in time when those applications come forth. So effectively, you're limiting, one, what the operational development is here, and also permitting the material change of use of the land to obviously for solar farm use for that 40-year period. After that, it's the lap of the gods as to whether or not another application comes forward, be it for agriculture or otherwise.
That sort of answers the second question.
It becomes agricultural land again unless there's a...
Because there's nothing in the report to say this, whereas normally there is. After the period of time, it's usually said it will revert to agricultural land.
I think the conclusion makes it quite clear, Madam Chairman. In conclusion, the use of 14% of grade 2, so on and so forth. Furthermore, the proposal will be for 40 years, after which time it will be cleared and revert back to its former agricultural use. So the very last paragraph and the sentence within that makes that point quite clear.
That's very clear. Thank you.
Chair, condition 4, reinforcing. Reinforces that the land shall hereafter be restored to its former condition.
So it is reinforced. Councillor, you have another question?
Yes, if I may, please, Chair. On page 75, 05, cessation before 40th anniversary. It's about reverting the land to its previous pristine state, hopefully. But it does say the removal of solar panels and associated above ground works approved under the permission, excluding the 2 substations. Why are we excluding the 2 substations? We all know that substations use oil to cool the coils and so on. Should we not be more clear that we want those substations to be removed as well?
I mean, it does appear to be industrial practice with all solar farms that these substations do remain afterwards. Certainly, if they're taken over by the distribution network operator, it does take it as out of our control. I'm afraid I can't answer any more. I presume we're not in a position to get the applicant back to ask.
Chair, if I may, this is a real concern. And there have been incidents where these substations have had oil leaks, and that will migrate into the water system, into the ground. We need to be quite clear.
We can ask the applicant. If you'd like to come forward, please. In extreme case, we need to ask this question of the applicant.
So the 2 substations that split into the customer substation and the DNO, at the end of the 40-year period, we'll be able to remove the customer substation. However, the DNO will be taken over by SSE because they will take ownership of that DNO substation, and we're not aware today whether that can be removed at the 40-year period.
Yeah, that's very clear. So it's something that we need to raise with SSE in due course. Thank you. Right, I think that's the end of questions. That's been quite exhaustive. We now move to debate. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. This is a major application, a significant one for our division, our district, and we have heard opinions expressed and some facts interrogated in considerable detail and force this morning. I think behoves us to remember that we have to make this decision as a planning committee, judging it on matters that are pertinent to a planning decision. And I note, to begin with, that the statutory consultees that have been approached are, with the exception of the landscape officer, supportive of this application. The parish council, I note, is also supportive, even though an adjoining parish council is not. And I think that we need to recognise, when we consider the landscape officer's report, that even though he recognises improvements have been made in the course of negotiations with the applicant, there is still damage that cannot be mitigated or cannot be fully mitigated. That is a fact. What we have to do then is determine whether the context of this application justifies mitigation, or whether the objection from the landscape officer is strong enough to overrule everything else. We have to make then a balanced decision. Essentially, the decision comes down to whether the government's energy policy and Climate Change Act, whether the support for solar energy generation in the national planning policy framework and Winchester's own declaration of a climate emergency are sufficient to overcome the concerns around the landscape? I will say that in my view, they are. But this is a serious matter. The debate has been it seems to me, has been quite binary. There is a view of the countryside and a view of the wider total environment, which is black and white. It's been suggested, for example, that visitors to the cafe, whether or not the economic case for the cafe is a planning matter, I don't go into that, but it's suggested that those visitors would be diminished if there were a view of the solar farm. I think that the view of the farm from Sarum Road would actually be quite minimal, and I have visited, but it would be a view. It would, of course, be possible to see the view. The question is, are walkers in the countryside seriously, is their enjoyment of the countryside seriously compromised by the fact that they can at times see a solar farm? In my experience, and I am a keen walker, I know a lot of walkers, I don't believe that's the case. I think it is understood that we live in a complex environment, which has evolved because of human action over 2,000 years. Wherever we go, we see the results of decisions made by humans for their benefit. And so I believe that in this case, a sensitively sited, relatively modestly sized solar farm in this location, with the mitigations proposed through planting and other measures, the assurances that are represented by no fewer than 27 conditions in this planning application, would mean that the public will generally take a balanced view. They may be disappointed sometimes that there is a solar farm, if we permit this, but they will also significantly recognize the benefit that that farm is giving to our community and the wider question of energy security and addressing climate change. And so I will be supporting this application.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pulled in two directions on this application. On the one hand is meeting our renewable energy targets, protect the global environment. On the other hand, to avoid destroying the local environment and the valued special landscape quality, and to protect farmland of grade 2 and grade 3B for invaluable food production and national self-sufficiency. Our own landscape officer describes the land as strongly rural, unspoiled with strong downland character, previously within special landscape quality designation. They go on. Marginal improvements are insufficient to offset visual impact on a distinctive rising undulating landscape, especially over the first 20 years. That's half the lifetime of this project. I quote, "The revised plan does not fully compensate for overall harm development would cause to the landscape and still result in a significant detrimental impact of open character, valued views and settings of Clarendon Way. Cannot fully mitigate negative impacts within sensitive downland settings without changing the fundamental character of the location. As I said earlier on, we should pay special attention to our own landscape officer and not ignore or dismiss his expert opinion. I am aware that there is no national policy or guidance on food security. but we do have local policies when it comes to development. That is brownfield first, greenfield only in exceptional circumstances, and because I fear the precedent for industrialization of rural landscapes and farmland this would set, I would suggest another category: viable and productive arable land farmland, hardly if ever. Having toured the site yesterday and seen the harm that this would cause to the landscape, I'm afraid I cannot support the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all compliment the officer for a very comprehensive report? As I've already stated, 98 pages. However, there were things still that were in other applications for this type of sites left out. And the main one is to ensure that all other locations have been examined and explained away. This one, we've got no sites that we've been drawn to our attention that could have taken their place. Local members are aware that there are possibly other less visible places where a solar farm could go, some of which are much closer to the connection point. Here we have two substations, which I believe is in the wrong location, very much out in the open. They could be moved closer to the grid itself with no real problem, but that's not the application before us. The visual aspect after 10 years is still not a good one. Sheep grazing. Sheep grazing tends to be seasonal in this part of the world. Most of the sheep come down from the Midlands or from Wales for grazing up, and that's where we get most of our sheep in the fields at the moment from. There are very few sheep farmers as such in this location. I think we must be aware that climate change says that we should be looking, and I agree with a lot of what Councillor Edwards has said. But I would draw your attention to page 46, a statement made by the Secretary of State, which is in our report. Meeting our energy goals should not be used to justify the wrong development. I believe this is the wrong development. Our landscape officers also agree it. We will be in breach of CP20, DM23, MTRA4, which I don't often support, and the MPPF. I feel this is the wrong place for this particular installation. I therefore will not be able to support the officer's recommendation.
Reid. Councillor Lee.
It's quite clear that this application, if approved, will have benefits and disbenefits. But I think we should not lose sight of the fact that some of the positive benefits would be that biodiversity net gain is a considerable enhancement. Whether you're looking at ecosystem services, pollination, nectar footprints dropping, the fact that we're actually enhancing with wildflowers is a positive. Agrivoltaics is a catchword, which means combining agricultural practices with energy production. And this has been used more widely around the world. We're catching up in this country. And it is manifest that you can use light and use land twice, and you can use it wisely. This contributes to a lower personal UK and national ecological footprint. That's important. It pains me to see the adjustment to the land character in our downland. Absolutely, I don't think it's not destroying the local environment, it's changing it. I don't think it's detrimental. There is a plan for restoration in the long run. We've talked about better locations. Of course, if we had a local energy plan with clear sites identified and opportunities, And I'm sure some of you may be aware, there's a 10 to 14 year connection wait for some of these solar farms to connect up, to decarbonize, help our energy security, get the greenhouse gases down. And this is an opportunity for us in our district to get green energy into the grid. And I think that should be very much welcomed. So as I say, there are benefits and disbenefits. I think in terms of balance of planning considerations, I'm minded to support this application, given the crises, basically nature, climate, and energy, and albeit a shame that the land character has to change. Thank you.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Thank you. I don't think it'd be too much of an exaggeration to say there's a visceral dislike of solar farms. But if you look, I mean, it's not a criteria for the decision, but there's an awful lot of support for these listed amongst the documents. So the idea that the business of Beech Farm is going to be slammed by these existing seems unlikely, because there's a lot of people who will be coming along there who will be will accept the site of this new development. I think also we have the idea that the landscape we see around us is permanent, and actually it isn't. It's dynamic and it's changing all the time. If you think back 50 years, the only time you saw bright yellow fields, well, the only place you saw it was up in Norfolk, where they grew the mustard crop for Coleman's. And now you look around, and in the summer with the oilseed rape, it's all over the place. A big visual change, but it's just sort of been accepted. A similar thing might be the polytunnels, which you get not so much around here, but there are many places in the Midlands where you get a lot of them, and they're accepted as part of the sort of farming infrastructure. I was slightly surprised that by the opposition to doing these for profit. Well, I must have missed something, because I thought most farmers grew crops for profit one way or another. And it is, for better or worse, what actually motivates our country or keeps it going. I think we have to recognise there's a big threat to our landscape, and that's climate change. And in my lifetime, elm trees have disappeared, oak trees are under great stress, chestnuts are under threat, ash trees are dying back. And a lot of this is due to the fact that in the winter, temperatures remain high, insect activity remains at a high level, and the trees are under great stress. And I think we have to recognise that we are having a climate emergency. It's not a sort of construct. And I think, therefore, I feel that we should make the decision to support this.
Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with a lot of what's been said, that clearly this is a very finely balanced decision to be made. 24 hectares, as has already been said, it's not an enormous solar farm as they go, but it does seem to be making a very efficient contribution to the grid, to both green energy and indeed our own energy security at a time when we badly need that. I fully take on board the point that ideally we wouldn't normally want this to be placed in such a beautiful area, and undoubtedly it is a beautiful area as we looked at it yesterday. That said, looking at the diagram on the presentation earlier from the officer, there are very few, if any, rights of way to the south of Sarum Road in this area. So the views of it will largely come from vehicles passing on the Sparshott Road, and with very limited views from Sarum Road. The vast majority of walkers will, of course, be using the rights of way network, the Clarendon Way and so on, where the view will be quite limited. And for the majority of the dog walkers in Westwood, they won't see it at all. So I think on balance, if we want to make this temporary contribution to green energy and energy security, this is probably at the moment an acceptable place to put it. It is for 40 years time, as Councillor Gordon-Smith just said. You know, the countryside does change. We may well have other better answers to our energy problems in 40 years time. Certainly hope we do. And therefore this is a relatively temporary use of the countryside, which can be restored to its original state at the end of it. So I think I will be voting in favour of the application.
Thank you. Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to congratulate the officer on a well-presented document. I also wish to compliment the objectors to their documents that they sent to us, which were very good and well reasoned, in my opinion. Being a supporter of environment and the use of solar farms, I think they have a very good place within the community for this. But there is a limit on where you put them. I think where they're out of mainstream views, such as the existing one in Hursley, the ones at the top of Three Mates Hill, produce something which is really good for the community in green energy and everything else. But I also listen to the objectors on this side, and I listen to the landscape officer, which I think we need to balance that out all the way through. I personally use that Sparshot Road quite a lot, so I know what it's like, and I go up to Farley Mount quite a lot. So that will affect the views of everything else, and you can see it from the Romsey Road, and you can see it from much further away. And I think that on balance, looking at it all, I cannot support this application.
Thank you. I don't think we've got any more debate, members, have we? I'd just like to add, I think that this is a relatively small solar farm development. An 81% biodiversity net gain should not be dismissed. We looked at the whole site, we drove all the way around it, we looked at the distant views and the views from the cafe. You can see it from the cafe. I think you might get a lot of extra people coming to see the solar farm. I could see more pigs than we would see panels. It's going to be very well screened. It's virtually invisible from most of the footpaths. There are no impacts on the protected areas, and we are facing a climate emergency. And that means that we have to make these difficult decisions. So I will be supporting the officer recommendation. I think we're ready to go to the vote, members. Yes, a quick summary of the changes to conditions, if that's okay, Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we wish to change the plan reference number in conditions 14 and 27. So it now refers to revision plan M. In condition 27, the biodiversity net gain figure in criteria A, which is down in the report as 79.27, needs to go up to 81.51% habitat units. As we've discussed earlier, it's the distribution network operator substation only that would remain. So in reflecting that, I would ask members to change conditions 4 and 5 so that the first bullet point says the removal of the solar panels and associated above ground works approved under this permission, excluding the DNO substation so that the customer substation is removed. And I would also ask that we add a reference in conditions 14 and 27 to a watering schedule requirement to address the issue that members raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with those amended conditions, could I see those in favour of the officer recommendation to approve this application? All those in favour?
6, Chairman.
And those against?
2, Chairman.
And any abstentions? Councillor Laming, are you voting?
Your objection or abstention, Councillor Laming?
Councillor Laming, are you for or against or abstaining? Against.
Three
So that's 3 against. That application is approved. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now take a break of 15 minutes and return at 11:50. Thank you. Thank you, members. I think we'll restart now if that's okay. So we now move to the next item on today's Planning Committee agenda, item number 7, which is consideration of change of use from former public house to residential. This is a City Council application, which is why it's before the committee. They automatically come to committee. One more objection. If there's one or more objection. So our presenting officer is Catherine Watson. Over to you, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is situated at the junction of North Walls and Parchment Street. You can just see in the middle there, there's the hatched area which denotes the site. Here we have the existing and proposed site plan. So the red line is the same in both, but on the left-hand side, it shows the footprint of the building in its existing form. And on the right-hand side, the proposed form of the building. Here we have existing elevations. So we've got the Parchment Street and North Walls elevations. And then we've got sections through the building. Here we have the proposed elevations. So at the top there, we've got the Parchment Street elevation, and the bottom we've got North Walls. So the existing elevation of the existing building, and then the proposed 2-storey extension. And then here we've got elevation to the rear of the building. That's part of the new extension. And again, we've got sections through the new and existing buildings. Here we have the proposed ground and first floor. So on the left-hand side, there's 3 one-bed units. There's space for bins, there's space for cycle storage. On the right-hand side, another 3 one-bed units on the first floor. And this slide shows us the cafes and pubs that are an approximate 5-minute walk from the site. So the site's this blue square, and the green stars show where pubs and cafes are. This doesn't take into account more formal restaurants. It's merely pubs and sort of cafe units. And here we have some photographs. So on the left-hand side, this is looking from the south at the junction with Parchment Street. So we'll see the building in pink there. The right-hand side, that's the Parchment Street elevation. And then on the left-hand side, again, we can see the junction between Parchment Street and North Walls. And then on the right, again, the Parchment Street elevation looking towards North Walls. On the left, we're looking from Parchment Street, looking down straight down to the junction. And on the right, similar view, but taken from slightly further back. On the left, we're looking from North Walls, and you'll just be able to see the pink facade just here. And on the right-hand side, this is taken from the opposite side of North Walls. And here we've got front-on elevation of the North Walls side of the building. And then again, on the right-hand side, we've got that elevation, plus we can see the building opposite. On the left-hand side, looking from North Walls, we can see the existing lean-to extension and garage. Those will be demolished and the new 2-storey extension built there. On the right-hand side, again, that's just a slightly different angle. And then on the left-hand side, this is looking down Parchment Street from North Walls. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the main entrance to the building as it currently is. So that concludes my presentation. We do have officers here present that can explain the marketing process. They're here on behalf of the local planning authority. But the recommendation is to permit subject to the conditions contained within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kat. Okay, we now move to public speaking. We have one objector, Quentin Brooke. If you'd like to come forward, Quentin. Good morning. You have 3 minutes to speak, and the time will start when you start speaking, so no rush. You just need to switch on the microphone by pressing the button at the base. And when you're ready, thank you.
Okay, good morning. I have no comments on the designs because the main issue with this application for me is to decide if this pub is permanently closed and converted to housing. It's a tough environment for pubs and they go up and down in their fortunes, but good landlords can reinvent them so that they are financially viable and provide communities with innovative places to eat, drink and meet. If every time one is sold, they're allowed to be converted to housing, then we'll eventually have none left. All pubs in Winchester are worth more as housing. That's why we have a local plan and a national planning framework to protect them. Prior to purchase, the housing team received written advice from planning that they would need to satisfy policy CP6 to change its use. I have only 3 minutes, but suffice to say that none of the policy criteria have been met. Instead, the housing team have focused on the design plans as if closing the pub is a foregone conclusion. The proposal to close the pub rests entirely on it being supposedly unviable. But the only argument given for this is that it was on the market for 12 months at £700,000 and didn't sell. Green King, the owner, wanted this pub to close after it sells so as not to compete with their remaining pubs. That's what they do. Marketing it at an inflated price and then having the developers say it's unviable because it didn't sell is the oldest trick in the book. No proper viability tests have been completed. I've had constructive discussions with Martin Todd, and he has proposed to the local plan consultation that a rigorous approach to pub viability be adopted in the future, and yet it is not being applied here. The application and officers report focus on the plans to create 6 flats for the council's housing team, as if this outweighs the loss of a community venue. But the decision to close the pub should not be affected by the proposed use, however laudable. These 6 flats are just 0.6% of the council's target of 1,000 new homes. There are less damaging opportunities elsewhere. The National Campaign for Pubs recently wrote an open letter to Martin Todd with their concerns about this case. Steve Brine commented to the Hampshire Chronicle saying, "I am grateful to the Campaign for Pubs for putting a marker down here. I would urge Winchester City Council to think very carefully before it's lost forever and simply can't reopen as a place where we can meet and come together." End of quote. This is an important application for all Winchester's pubs. Approval would go against policy CP6 of the local plan and provide precedent for developers in the future elsewhere. We'll be looking back in 10 to 20 years and asking, where have all Winchester's pubs gone? I ask that you refuse this application, if only so that the pub's viability can be properly assessed by placing it on the market valued as a pub. If there are still no buyers, then the housing team could bring this application back and it would have the credibility it needs to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sticking to your time. If you could just wait for a second. Members, do we have any questions of clarification? Councillor Leeming.
Question of viability. How many landlords have been in that pub in the last 10 years? Because I seem to remember that it's had quite a few and they all struggle to make ends meet on it.
Yeah, I don't know how many landlords, but that's pretty typical of a Pubco Green King environment where they have a high lease cost. People think it's their aspiration to run a pub. They invest their life savings, they run it, they realise they run through their money because it's a tied pub. It's got a massive lease cost, high cost of drinks, and then they move on. And that's what the big Pubcos do. If it was independent, untied, it would be very different.
Thank you. No further question, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm picking up on the fact that this is described as in a tertiary hospitality location, and the footfall is poor, and the connectivity of the high street is not great. So I'm just trying to understand why you want to preserve something which may not have the viability in terms of making itself a going concern.
Well, I think the argument could be applied to any pub that is not in the high street in that case. Are we only going to have pubs in the high streets? There's lots of pubs sprinkled around our housing areas that are great community areas and venues, and they attract people because they're good pubs. That's the problem, not where it is. It did have very good attendance, and it could do again. And in terms of football, not football, sorry. Still thinking about last night. So actually, I had a chat with Liz Kessler about this. She's a nearby neighbour, and she mentioned that there's an interesting point that people are trying to push more people along Parchment Street. Actually, when they come out of that car park, they go the other way along Middlebrook Street, which is far less interesting. I actually don't think that the main interest for this would be people visiting the city necessarily and walking to the city centre. I think it's locals, and they just need good, decent places to meet. And it needn't necessarily be solely a pub, but it could be all sorts of different things.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that's the end of questions. Thank you. If you could just switch the microphone off as you go. Thank you. Now we have two ward councillors. First of all, Councillor Reach. Mark, if you'd like to come forward, thank you. And you have 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes from when you started speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll be speaking in support of this application today. I'm the local ward member for St Michael Ward, where we're sat at this moment, and also where the proposed development is. I also live in the ward and have done since 2010. In that time, I think I've frequented most of our pubs in the ward. I understand we have 112 licensed premises in Winchester City Centre. Of course, not all of those are pubs, but many of them are. And it is always sad to see a pub go, but I look back through my records because I'm meticulous in that way. And so we last visited the Corner House on the 21st of December in 2014. We had a lovely time, but by that point, the pub had turned very much into a cafe, bar, restaurant. We had a very nice family meal there. I even had the menu choices I made. Since that time, the pub or the restaurant, as it became at that point, has closed and has been derelict for a few years. The thing that first attracted us to Winchester to move here was, amongst other things, the great transport links, good schools, good countryside, but also the good pubs. But the other thing at the time was, it was what we could afford. When I first moved down, I rented a 1-bed flat here in the ward, and it was under £700 a month. And I think you would really, really struggle to find anything at that price point today in Winchester. That in and of itself does more damage to the viability of our hospitalities in this city than anything else. It's the fact, it's the cost and the price and the inability, particularly for young people, young families, to settle here. So turning to the application itself, I think the provision of 6 small units, 6 1-bed units, which would be at the right point in the market, I think is something we desperately need in the city, and in particular we desperately need in St Michael Ward. They will have access when the people move in to a number of good pubs in the vicinity, including the Mucky Duck, which is just up the road, and then at the other end of the street, all of the pubs on the high street that we've already heard about today. So I think, in summary, the transformation of this site, which has lain derelict for some years, into 6 modest dwellings, gives an opportunity for people to move to the area, a type of accommodation that we so desperately need here in Winchester, and brings a derelict building back into use, which itself is very close to a significant number of other licensed premises. So that's why I would support this application today.
Thank you. Members, do we have any questions or clarification for Councillor Reach? Nope. Thank you very much indeed. And now we have Councillor Chris Westwood, the Cabinet Member and Member for St Paul's as well. And you have 5 minutes as well, Councillor Westwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to address the Planning Committee today. I'm here to support the Corner House planning application, and I'll do this by discussing three areas: the proposed change of use, what should the building be used for, and returning a neglected building to be a local valuable asset. Firstly, on the proposed change of use, I'm as keen as anyone on retaining great pubs. Indeed, I have a current case in my ward, the Albion, where I will be campaigning very hard if there's any threat to its continuing as a pub. In my time, I have used the Corner House, and my experience has been the venue that is more of a cafe or restaurant where people go to eat, have breakfast, brunch, light evening meal, rather than a more traditional pub. And indeed, it's not been a traditional pub for a very long time. If you read the reviews in the on the Corner House in Beer in the Evening, the first three comments dating back to 2011 are all very clear, saying no longer a pub, not a proper pub, and not a pub. Perhaps because of that, when the Corner House closed its doors more than 5 years ago, I can't say I was surprised. The officer's report is very clear that in their professional opinion, the marketing undertaken by Savills was of a sufficient period to be able to demonstrate that there was no viable interest in the premises as a hospitality or retail event. This included a significant reduction in price during the period the Corner House was being marketed. You will have seen in the officer's report the large number of hospitality venues available within a 5-minute walk of the Corner House, and indeed in the city area there are 112 such outlets. The town has a wide and varied excellent food, drink offer that is similar to what the Corner House in its previous incarnation offered, and also the more traditional pub offer. The growing competitiveness of the sector almost certainly contributed to the difficulty in keeping the Corner House open. So secondly, if the Corner House is not viable as a hospitality venue, what should it be used for? Winchester City Council purchased this building after it became clear there was no appetite by anybody to reopen it as a hospitality venue. The intention is to use the Corner House to add badly needed additional affordable accommodation in the city area. There are currently around 1,500 people on the Hampshire Home Choice Register who are waiting to move into affordable homes. The waiting period for affordable one-bed flats on the Hampshire Home Choice is between 8 months and a year and a half, depending on the applicant's circumstances. There is a real unmet demand for this type of accommodation, and I support the application before you to restore this historic building to provide additional affordable one-bed accommodation. Indeed, the proposed change of use for the Corner House and conversion to one-beds is supported by Winchester City Trust, and their response is available on the planning portal. Thirdly, returning a neglected building to be a valuable asset. This is a good-looking historic building in a conservation area, and as such, it should be reused and brought back into use whilst maintaining its historic features. The planning application before you will deliver this outcome, and the certainty of delivering this outcome is adequately managed by the constraints as documented in the planning officer's report. The design will deliver warm, energy-efficient accommodation. The fabric of the building will be upgraded to deliver higher thermal efficiency. There will be no use of fossil fuels for heating, with the use of solar PV and air source heating delivering low carbon footprint accommodation. The Corner House is very adequately served by public transport, provides integral cycle stores when it's redeveloped, and is within minutes of the city centre retail and hospitality business. So in summary, the professional planners are clear the case for change of use has been made. More affordable accommodation is badly needed to meet demand, and this is a good use of this lovely building. The proposed plans will deliver modern, warm, comfortable homes, retaining the historic features of this great building, and the Corner House will once again be an asset to the area. I do hope you'll be minded to approve this application, and thank you for your time.
Very much, Councillor Westbrook. Now, do we have any questions of clarification of Councillor Westwood? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you. And finally, we have 3 supporters. Martin Wiltshire, Deborah Sunley and Simon Maggs from the housing team. I assume that you've decided between you how you're going to allocate your 3 minutes. I'll leave it up to you. Okay, lovely. Thanks, Deborah. Thank you.
Good morning. We're here to support the Corner House planning application, and we'll do this outlining 3 key areas of background and context, the key aspects of the proposals, and thirdly, community and member engagement. Firstly, regarding background and context. The Corner House originally served as a public house and then as a cafe before closing over 5 years ago. Following closure, it was extensively marketed by the vendors, but failed to attract interest by prospective food and beverage establishments. The number of hospitality establishments in the area has already been alluded to in previous presentations, and you can see these marked up on the slide being shown. Consequently, in January 2020, Cabinet approved the purchase of the Corner House to develop affordable housing to support the Council's target of building 1,000 homes by 2030. Proposals also support the Homes for All and Greener Faster Council Plan priorities. Secondly, regarding the proposals are to convert and extend the property to 6 single-bedroom flats to retain as much as possible of the building and footprint and retain the building's historic facade. Internal cycle and bin storage will also be included. The new homes will be energy efficient and aim to exceed building regulations and local plan standards to support the Council's greener, faster priority. It's intended to replace the existing poorly performing windows and doors with products in a traditional style consistent with the building's heritage, but with high thermal performance values. Solar PV panels are proposed, with those on Parchment Street inset for a discreet appearance. Other energy efficient measures include additional insulation and electric heating with air source heat pumps. Thirdly, regarding community and member engagement. Engagement has included an online consultation in late 2021, as well as engagement with neighbours, which resulted in a design amendment to take account of concerns. Local ward members have been kept informed and are fully supportive of the proposals. In summary, the Cabinet approved the purchase of the Corner House for much needed affordable housing, which supports the Homes for All priority. The proposals will provide energy efficient accommodation to support the Council's greener, faster priority, and at the same time are sympathetic to the conservation area to give the building a viable and long-term future. Thank you for your time.
Very much. Well kept within your 3 minutes. Members, do we have any questions of clarification? Councillor Reid.
Chairman, it's not based on what's been presented. Is that okay with you? It's a question about the bins, which I would imagine they're the only ones who can answer.
They are shown on the floor plan.
Sorry?
The location of the bins is shown on.
Just question.
Well, just a quick clarification, yes?
Yeah, okay, clarification, we'll call it then. The bin store, which I'm glad to see, the photographs on page 142 onwards are horrible. Am I right in reading this plan that the only access is that one door onto the street? There's no internal access for the ground floor to get to the bins. Number of bins themselves, there are 8 for 6 flats, and each household everywhere else, I believe, has 4 bins.
Okay, well, I can answer the question about bins. There are 8 bins. 1 is for glass, 3 are for recycling, and 4 are for refuse.
Any further questions of clarification? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just curious to know what the energy performance certificate will be for the properties, and can you confirm that the you're going to be selling them, and is that at a pitched at a standard Winchester type sale price, or is there some other incentives that might make this very attractive to those who need affordable accommodation?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Answering your second question first, we've still got to determine tenure. It could be affordable rented, or it could be affordable shared ownership. Shared ownership is based on a proportion of the open market value, but they will both be either option will be NPPF compliant affordable housing. In terms of the energy efficiency, we have done some initial modelling to help develop proposals. We'll be aiming to be at least better than Part L. We aim to be as green as we possibly can. You'll appreciate that as part of the detailed design, we'll be working with an energy consultant to work up the fine details of that. And we'll be able to model and forecast more clearly how that building will perform in use as part of that detailed design process. And as we talked about a few days ago, we'll also be looking at how the building performs actually in use as well. So we'll be monitoring energy usage, and we will be talking to residents about their experiences as they live through that in the building the first year.
In a very quick supplementary, may. The reason I ask, obviously, I can see the footprint is quite tight. So if you really want to get this to a really high energy efficiency standard, that means probably internal wall insulation, which obviously is going to change the space of the living accommodation. So that was a concern for me.
Can I just add something to that? As a part of the design, we work with energy consultants to actually work out the size of the walls. So they represent the space that will actually be in the flats.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You may return to your seats. Thank you. Okay, Catherine, following our public contributions, do you want to add anything before we go to members' questions?
Nothing further, thank you, Chair.
So members, we also have from the City Council's Estates Department, Jeff Coe and Richard Wadman, who could talk in detail about the marketing of the property and any questions you might have about that, should you have such questions. And if you do, I will ask them to come forward to answer those questions. So, any questions on the whole report? Councillor Gordon-Smith. Sorry, can you just put on your microphone and say what that again?
Sorry, I'm interested in the viability tests that were done.
I think that's yes, Richard and Jeff, if you could just come to a microphone and answer that.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Coe. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question. We can answer questions about the purchase of the site. The viability is down to the New Homes team. So I'd invite Simon Maggs up here to help answer that question.
No, they can't come again. If you could tell us about the marketing of the site, that would be great. Thank you.
It's difficult to add to a very clear officer's report and to the two members' representations this morning. What I can say is that we started negotiating on the site a year after it had been widely marketed by a very reputable agent with clearly no interest or responses or offers from the food and beverage sector, which was no surprise given the internal compromised nature of the space, no external outside space for visitors and patrons, and the significant capex required to restore and refurbish the property. We got an email, written confirmation from Savills about how they'd marketed the site and the lack of bids for food and beverage on the site. So we were clear with the purchase that that policy compliant marketing had been discharged.
That's very clear, I think. Thank you. Any further questions on that aspect? No, thank you very much indeed. You may switch off the mic and return to your seat. Thank you. Further questions on the report for Catherine? Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on from that last question, really, with the report, is it correct to say then that if the property was marketed for a year, price came down, the asking price came down, then it is deemed to be unviable with that use?
Thank you, Chair. I think what the marketing process showed, as you rightly point out, that it was marketed as a pub or food and beverage premises. The price came down 3 times within the 12-month period, and the final time was as a result of the council showing an interest in the building for conversion into residential properties. I think that that marketing process shows that the property wasn't viable for that type of pub or food and beverage use. In my report, it does set out the various policies that the development would have to comply with in order for it to be acceptable, for it to be converted into housing, as opposed to trying to continue to market it as either a pub or another type of food and beverage property. So I know that our housing team will have looked into that very carefully, but yeah, I think the marketing exercise demonstrates that it wasn't viable for those particular uses. Thank you.
Councillor Pett.
Can I just come back? I'm asking something quite specific here, that in planning policy terms, having the price having come down like that, in policy terms, that deems it to be unviable as a commercial outlet. Is that correct?
I think, Councillor, it might help if we actually look at policy CP6, which is engaged here. So CP6 talks about local services and facilities. And if I read from you, from the actual, it's in the report as well, but if I read the actual policy from the core strategy, development proposals should not threaten or result in the loss of premises or sites used to provide services and facilities unless it can be demonstrated that the site or premise is not required because the service or facility has been satisfactorily relocated, which this isn't, or is no longer needed to serve the locality. So it's a point of need. And it must also satisfy the next part. The site or building has no reasonable prospect of being used for an alternative service or facility which would benefit the community. So the point about viability is talked about in the round, but not explicitly mentioned. It's those two-pronged tests. It goes on to say, when considering proposals, account will be taken of whether the loss of the service or facility would cause harm for those living within the neighbourhood, settlement or rural catchment, with a reasonable need to access such facilities in the future. Hence why you see in Catherine's report, those facilities within the locality within a reasonable 5-minute walk. So if members were minded to refuse, you have to obviously say it fails on those points and there is demonstrable harm.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And that's clearly on page 118 and 119 of our reports. Councillor Reid.
Sorry, Chair, maybe this is something I should have asked when I had the opportunity earlier. It's still around the storage bins. I would assume that the door that enters into that storage area will be of a lockable nature and only the people who need access to it will have access to it.
Chair. Oh, sorry. The bin stores will only be accessible. There's 2 doors that go in from the street to the sort of lobby area on the ground floor where the bin storage is. I would assume those doors would be lockable. People would have to either use a keypad or a card or something to get in. So in that sense, it would prohibit members of the public in general from using those bins. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Chair, I have a question, but also a quick follow-up, if I may, first to Councillor Reid's question and your answer. Given that the pavement is so narrow at that point, in my opinion, the pictures we saw showed bins all along the frontage. Has any consideration been given to allowing or requiring the bins to be collected by the operatives from their position in the secluded corridor?
I'm not sure that we.
Beyond the scope of
I
this
think that's
meeting.
beyond our scope.
I think, Chairman, yes, we're making provision for bin storage, but it's obviously a matter for other bodies. Yes, it's the City Council that do the bin collection, but it's not the local planning authority. And actually, those arrangements would be such that the City Council would manage that, Chair.
I appreciate that. Perhaps I could move on to my substantial question then, or I hope more substantial question, which is about solar panels, which are described on page 122 and 123 of the report. I understand that some of the solar panels details to be provided will be on the flat roof of the extension, but there are also solar panels proposed for both, am I correct, the front and rear or west and east sloping elevations. My understanding, which is probably contingent and maybe out of date, is that in a conservation area, solar panels on roofs visible from the street are generally discouraged. So, could you correct that understanding?
Thank you, Chair. It's correct that solar panels in conservation areas wouldn't be permitted development, so they would need planning permission. Obviously, the solar panels have come forward as a part of this current application, and therefore, the members minded to approve the application, that would then confer planning consent for the panels. I'm very aware that we're in a conservation area and the building has been designated a non-designated heritage asset. Precisely for that reason is why I've included a condition, which is condition 5, which is on page 129, requiring technical details of the panels, including finish, profile in relation to the roof of the existing building and proposed extension, to be submitted. And the New Homes team, as applicant, are very aware that what goes there has to very much respect the character and appearance of the conservation area and not visually harm either the conservation area or the building itself. The reason that the details were not agreed prior to consent is, I think it says in my report, there's lots of developments being made very quickly of technology, solar technology, and therefore that condition will allow different options to be explored and the best option for all round to be selected. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification. I was not critical of the proposal to have solar panels in principle.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the location of the air source heat pumps. In my former life as a city vice advisor, I recall many occasions, particularly in urban areas, complaints about the hum and the noise levels. So if you could perhaps just indicate where those might be, and then can we potentially condition to ensure that those noise levels are totally appropriate, even though previous complaints have dealt with installed to an MCS standard, but it just doesn't seem to do the job in terms of noise.
Thank you, Chair. There is a condition, condition 12 on page 130, that does cover how the proposed premises, so that the 6 new dwellings would be protected from external noise or vibration. That's a more sort of blanket condition mostly to do with the noise from the roads. And as we know, North Walls is a very busy road, and that will be achieved through appropriate glazing and insulation, etc. In terms of the actual position of the air source heat pumps, I'm aware that there is a minimum or maximum rather level of noise that they can make. I think that is also being reviewed by our environmental protection team as well, before they can be considered as a statutory noise nuisance. So in this instance, I don't think that they would cause a problem in terms of harm to the community, either of the people that are using the building or nearby properties in terms of excessive noise. But there are ways of dealing with that if that should become a problem in the future. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I'm still not clear. Where will these air source heat pumps be installed?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking off the top of my head. I'm not completely sure, so I'm just having a look to see. I can't see on the diagram. That doesn't mean that they're not there.
We do have experts on hand who can tell us where they are. Is that Richard? Simon, you can tell us where they are. Please, the applicants can come forward. That's one question. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to answer that question. It's not easy to see. Internally, there's what are called compact units on the plans. I'm not sure if they show on your plans at that scale, but they're very clear on the planning drawing that's submitted. Those are the internal elements of the air source heat pumps, and then those are vented through the roof. So the air extraction intake is on the roof level, so that's not visible from the conservation area. And there'll be vents in each individual room to make sure the air exchange is sufficient to meet the residents' needs and meet building regulations requirements.
Yeah, so I guess my point to the officer was that, yes, the external noise is covered, but the internal noise issues that as I say, I've dealt with previously in my previous life have always been an issue. So hopefully we'll be addressing those to the highest standard.
Absolutely, and that's where we, as owners and landlords of the building, can come into our own, because it's not in our interest to install things that result in complaints or encourage tenants or residents to turn them off. So we need to make sure they are fit for purpose for those residents. Very good point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maggs. And yes, they're on the plan as compact units, and there's one for each flat if you just have a look on your plans in the documents. If there are no more questions to our case officer, we will move to debate. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Looking back, Chair, at what the objector, Mr. Brooks, indicated, I can well understand why he's asking for this. I come from another city, my city is nearer to where I live, and they have lost a tremendous number of licensed premises. Partly because of cost of living, etc., especially since the pandemic struck in 2020. But it's a case of, like buses, use or lose. And obviously, if you have a good chef, you can make a pub. If you haven't got a good chef, you're not going to have a good pub. What I am pleased to see is the fact that this is in a conservation area. And I think it was Councillor Westwood who said the fabric of the building is going to be maintained. And that is important. We too often go along, knock it down, build something new, and we lose the elements of a historic city. With regards to the new element that's going to be built on, I don't have any problems with new elements being built onto older properties. It's in reasonable keeping, it's quiet, it's soft looking, and I wish the project complete success. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Pett and then Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. The reason for my earlier question really was I was trying to give my conscience a way out on all of this, because if the report clearly states the change of use is a done deal, then fair enough. I was just going to say that I have a tremendous amount of sympathy with Mr. Brooks' view that this is the loss of a community asset, not a settlement asset, but a community asset, a space where people in that very local vicinity can meet and do things and all the rest of it. I share his view that I find it sad that such facilities are being lost. I would suggest that people make greater use of the scheme of declaring assets of community value to try and stop them being lost. I think in the circumstances we find ourselves, however, clearly there is a high housing need, and I'd be minded to support the application on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, just to say I'm heartened to see that the engagement with the community has got positive support. So that really is good news. And in my head, any building that's derelict is very sad. So it's good to see repurposing of a building, particularly for affordable housing, which, as we know, is in much need across the district. And also, very importantly, is going to be done sympathetically with respect to heritage and conservation. And also what I like is the low carbon application in terms of the retrofit. So good news, and I'm happy to support.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Well, I have to rather echo what Councillor Lee said. The sight of derelict buildings, particularly close to the city centre, I think is desperate. You know, they do very little for the area, and then you get a sort of an ongoing process of decline. And to see this building slowly decaying, and now that process is being reversed, I think is wonderful. And there's a huge need for small housing units, six more people living there, hopefully spending their money in pubs not too far away. I think it's great. I'd be very much in favour of this. I was reassured by the viability issue, and I know it's very difficult for pubs to make a living. In my own town of Alsford, there've been, since I've lived there 25 years, 2 pubs have closed. It's slightly the way of the world at the moment. Yep.
Indeed, well, let's hope that the new occupants all use the willow tree as well down the road, since the mucky duck got a name check. I thought I'd name check the willow tree. Councillor Laming.
Thank you. Having lived in Worcester for a long time, I think I've been in every pub. So it's great and sad to see one go, because they are community assets. But the problem is the community must use them to keep them. This particular pub has suffered with economic problems for a number of years. So I can fully understand the justification on the viability side of it. And I think that this has been put forward as a very sympathetic renovation of a building which keeps the nature and environment of that particular streets in keeping. And we also managed to achieve something which is unusual for Winchester, where we get affordable housing in it for 1 and 2 bedroom places. So I'm fully in favour of this, and I congratulate the housing team for being open-minded and thinking out of the box on this project.
Indeed, thank you very much, Councillor Laming. Okay, members, we now move to the decision. So this application is recommended for permission. Can I see all those in favour? And that's all members. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Right, I think Catherine, you're doing, no, it's Liz, isn't it? Yeah. 2 minutes just to transfer change officers. Thank you. And this is an application at land to the northwest of Botley Road in Curdridge. And our presenting officer is Liz Young. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start the main presentation, just to give a verbal update on highway comments received yesterday for this application. They raised no objections, but say in their comments that they would like further information relating to vehicle tracking, just to show that a vehicle can pull off the road and turn before exiting the site. I drafted a condition, an additional condition, and run this by highways requesting that information, and they've confirmed by email that they're happy with that condition. So an additional condition would be added to those that are already on the report. So just moving on to the first slide, the proposal relates to the development of a hay barn in association with the existing equestrian use on the site, and also some alterations to the existing access and the formation of an internal access between the vehicle access and the barn. The site lies in open countryside and is accessed from the Botley Road, which runs along the southeast boundary. There are no residential properties close to the site. It's joined by open fields. This next slide shows the aerial view of the site, which is marked by the yellow star. As you can see, it's part of a wider triangular parcel of land, about 4 hectares in total. So this area of land has got an established equestrian use, with permission having been granted for this back in 2021. There are no rights of way close to the site, and the roadside boundary is enclosed mainly by hedgerow and some small trees. This next slide just shows the proposed layout plan. So the access, what the proposal is to retain an existing concrete strip which has been added to the access, and to slightly enlarge this also. The barn itself would be to the west of this, so that's the rectangular area you can just see here on the roadside boundary. A new parking and turning area would be formed in front of this, and a track would run between this and the access. This next slide shows the elevations of the barn. So the barn's needed to store hay and a tractor in association with the equestrian use. The barn would have a footprint of about 160 square metres, and it would be about 4.5 metres in height. The facing materials to the walls would be concrete panels with timber cladding. Just moving on to the photos, this is the view looking towards the site from Botley Road. So this is looking towards the approximate location of the barn, with the access towards the right, just there. This is again a view from the Botley Road, but looking from the east, again looking back towards the access. This is a view looking directly towards the access. You can see the concrete strip and the existing metal gate there. So as I mentioned, the concrete strip is to be enlarged slightly, and the gate is to be set slightly further back into the site to enable a vehicle to pull off the road. This is a closer view from the access looking into the site. The existing post and rail fencing would be replaced by native hedgerow, although the fence would remain while this becomes established. This is a view from the access looking towards the barn. So the barn would be about 12 metres from this location, and set in from the road by about 1.5 metres. This is a view looking back from the barn location back towards the access. This is a view looking south from within the site, looking back towards the access and the Botley Road. This final photo just shows the view looking from within the site towards the existing equestrian buildings, which have been built off Vicarage Lane and Minefield Lane. As that brings us to the end of the slides,
just to conclude, the recommendation is that planning permission should be granted, but with specific conditions requesting details of landscaping, including the gates design, and also drainage, surface drainage. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
That's the highways condition which you mentioned earlier.
Yep, so there would be another condition added. I've agreed the wording of that. If you want me to read it out, I can, but
that'd be helpful.
So the condition would read, no further development shall take place on site until a scaled drawing showing vehicle tracking, which demonstrates that vehicles associated with the equestrian use can enter and exit the site in forward gear through the site access.
Good. So now, thank you very much. That's the end of your presentation, isn't it? Yes. So now we move to public speaking. And our first public speaker is Councillor Jonathan Carkeet from Kirdridge Parish Council. Let's come forward, Mr. Carkeet. You will have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. And do you know how to switch on the microphone? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm here on behalf of the Kirdridge Parish Council, who have expressed concerns about this proposed barn development on Botley Road and would ask that members carefully consider the impact this development will have on its rural setting. The initial proposal for this application was for the barn to be built further away from the road, and the Parish Council did not raise an objection to this location. However, the application before you today is for an 1,850 square foot building directly adjacent to the road in a highly visible location. The site is located midway along a stretch of 800 metres of open countryside, extending from the railway line to the Kirdridge Church. The principal objection from the Parish Council is that due to the scale of the proposed development, it will have a significant visual impact on the existing rural landscape, which is therefore contrary to WCC Local Plan Policy MTRA 4, development in the countryside. The proposed structure is located directly adjacent to existing hedgerow, which is less than 1.8 metres high. The structure is stated as being 4.5 metres high in the planning report. However, due to the existing site levels, which slope uphill, the structure will be higher than this relative to the hedgerow and therefore increase its prominence, and this is an oversight in the existing plans. The barn is proposed at 18.5 metres long, which is 4 bays wide. It will therefore be very visible, and whilst the agricultural nature of the design is recognised, the overall scale of the building will be detrimental to the local vernacular. The existing long views along Botley Road are of open countryside. The introduction of a large structure will interrupt these views and sets a precedent for further development. The application site was formerly part of a single field, which has been subdivided into 3 plots. 1 barn is already permitted. This would be the second such structure, and last year, WCC granted permission for a further entrance into the adjacent 3rd plot, less than 100 metres away. Granting planning permission for this scale of development sets a dangerous precedent for further large barns in close proximity and serial development by way of subdivision of the land. The WCC local plan states development in the countryside should have an operational need. The planning report refers to a single horse using the field and the storage of 200 bales of hay, which equates to 2 years' supply of hay. The current large scale of the barn is therefore does not pass the test for operational need. A more modest structure would be appropriate and comply with the existing policy. Kirdridge Parish Council understand every planning application is considered on the balance of its merits against policy and the wider impacts. In this instance, we recognise as a rural setting, an agricultural barn in itself is not inappropriate. However, this application is for a substantial structure that will have a detrimental visual impact, and its significant scale is not suitable for this location. We therefore request members consider that rural setting, a structure that is over 3 metres higher than the hedgerow, nearly 20 metres long, and will be the first building to be constructed on 800 metres of otherwise uninterrupted countryside. Consider the precedent this sets for allowing large structures to be permitted under MTRA 4 to gain permission regardless of their appropriateness. Therefore, regardless of the merits of the proposed use, we ask members reject the substantial proposal and protect the countryside from overdevelopment.
Thank you. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for the Parish Councillor? No? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Next we have the ward councillor, Councillor Siddhartha Ashwell. Welcome, Siddhartha, if you'd like to come forward. And you will have up to 5 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak at the meeting this morning. I would like to outline my objections for this planning application. The planning application site comprises of, as you said, 0.8 hectares of the land. The change of use from agriculture to private equestrian use and construction of stables was agreed in 2021. Now, it's not clear, at least from the planning application, any of the sizes of the buildings, particularly the barn, and I have concerns about the barn. The report states on page 150 that the proposed barn would occupy an external footprint of 160 square meters and height of 4.5 meters. The barn will be used for 200 bales of hay and is intended to feed one horse, which is to be grazed on the site over the winter months. So very clear requirements of what is expected. If you look up, and probably some of you already know, the amount of hay required. So 1,000 pounds of bale of hay, about 5 feet diameter, 5 feet length, can feed a horse for 10 to 14 days. If you suppose a strong horse, so this amount of bale will last about 40 bales. For a horse, it will require about 40 bales a year. So when we talk about 200 bales, seems to be extraordinarily large amount. This 40 bales of year of the hay required will take about 150 meter cube, no more than that. Now, if you take that into account and the space required for the tractor, the size of the building seems to be over the top. Policy DM12 states that the number and the size of the building should be kept to a minimum and limited to those for which a countryside location is essential. The planned location in the revised plan site is adjacent to the Botley Road, as you've seen over there, and close to the board fencing is not in keeping with the natural hedgerows in the locality. The barn will be clearly visible from the road and it will compromise the openness of the land. Policy DM12 requires development to minimize the visual impact. Policy MTR A3 requires that all new development should be appropriate in scale and design and conserve each settlement's identity, countryside, setting, and local features, particularly as identified in the village statement. Hence, I request the members to reject this planning application as in current state. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Ashwell. Any questions of clarification, members? No? Thank you very much indeed. You may return to your seat.
Thank you.
And finally, we have the supporter, Michael Nappit. Mr. Nappit, if you'd like to come forward. Thank you. And you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you very much.
Okay, please bear with me. I'm struggling with my voice a little. I'll press on. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. My name is Michael Nappit. I'm the agent for the planning application. Mr. Frederick James, the applicant and site owner, welcomes the officer recommendation that the application should be approved. The applicant acquired the application site in June of last year, with the access drop curb and the hard standing already in situ. The former was created prior to November 2008 and the latter in October 2020. The applicant's daughter owns a horse and is currently grazes land that is to be developed for housing as part of the North Whiteley development. The intention is to bring this horse to the site to graze in due course. The proposed barn will be used to store up to 200 bales of hay, which will be enough to feed a horse, throughout the year. This will take up half the barn, and the other half will be used to store a tractor and associated machinery used to maintain the land. The applicant has worked with the planning officer throughout and has agreed to resite and reduce in size the proposed barn and length of access track. The boundary treatment around the entrance has also been subject to changes. Amended plans have been submitted and published online. Existing post and rail fencing either side of the access will be replaced in time once the new native species hedgerows have become established. The proposed use is entirely appropriate in this location and within the wider countryside. An equestrian use is the approved use of the land as a result of the planning permission granted in 2021, which related to a stable building and the change of use of the land. Both the stables, now named Oak Stables, and some other tin sheds to the southwest are visible from Botley Road. The council has also recently approved a new access off Botley Road for the parcel of land adjoining to the northeast, as the officer mentioned. Given the limited size of the site, it is not sufficient for significant horse grazing. The British Horse Society recommends a ratio of 1 horse per 0.4 to 0.6 hectares on permanent grazing. Based on the application site size, this would only be suitable for up to 2 horses to graze as a maximum to avoid overgrazing of the land. To address any concerns regarding the potential for surface water flooding, a planning condition is recommended to deal with the surface water from the site. The applicant agrees to the imposition of this condition and the other suggested ones in the report, together with the additional one suggested by the planning officer. In summary, the proposal relates to a low-key use of the site for equestrian purposes, which is already the approved use on the site. We hope that you are able to approve this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions or clarification for the agent? Councillor Laming.
The number of bales you're stating seems to be really high for 1 horse. And I'm concerned that this is a very large building for the minimum the amount of land that you've got there.
The barn is designed to accommodate up to 200 bales of hay, not necessarily 200. The applicant has experience in looking after his daughter's horse on a site currently in Curbridge. And I've challenged him on this, and he said the barn could accommodate that amount of hay which would be sufficient for more than 1 year's worth of hay.
Yeah.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, members, you may return to your seat. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. Liz, do you want to add anything? Sorry, yes, his list, yes. So, wrong label. Would you like to add anything before we get to questions?
Yeah, just one thing to point out was the close bordered fencing is no longer proposed following the submission of the amended plans. Thanks.
Chair, with your permission, Dan and I have just been talking. We wanting to propose an amendment to condition 6 to remove just the words for the purposes of agriculture out of it, just because we just heard from the applicant that sort of keep recreational use of the keeping of horses or maintaining the land, which is obviously the other element of the store. So just a slight variation to condition 6, Chair, before you start questions and move into debate, perhaps.
Indeed, thank you very much. So that's, if you could just confirm that proposal.
In condition 6, Chair, just to remove the words for the purposes of agriculture.
Okay, thank you very much. This is for equestrian use. Councillor Laming, you have a question.
In the conditions, while you're talking about that, can we have a condition in there that requires all the manure from the horses to be removed from the site rather than stockpiled?
I think we can, that's already permitted.
This is quite common in a lot of
There's a condition on details of the facilities for the storage of horse manure. Liz?
Quite often, well, when we impose this condition, we'd normally consult environmental protection. I know that their preference normally is for the manure to be moved off site regularly. So as part of satisfying that condition, that would be considered as part of the information.
Regular removal will be part of that condition. Thank you. Okay, general questions then. Councillor Reid.
Forgive me. tack room and hay store. The hay store we know about. Is there a tack room on site? Are there stables, any stable block on site? Because the plans aren't showing a stable block, that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I was worrying about that as well, because I think there is stabling, but it's not for this particular field. Is that the case, Liz?
So as I said, it's part of a wider area of land of 4 hectares. There are stables on the other parcels within those 4 hectares. There's no stables on this site. It's not been stated that there's a need for stabling on this particular site as part of this application.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I hope Liz can help. I'm trying to reconcile the issue about the existing open spaces. There's already been commented on that this building's scale in the open field might be deemed to be inappropriate, particularly with respect to the village design statement. So I wonder if you could just comment on that. Does the village design statement have any weight in shaping how this should be done? And obviously you've considered it, but I just don't understand how we can reconcile that.
Obviously the report does consider the village design statement, and yes, it does have weight alongside the other relevant documents, including the supplementary planning guidance on horse-related development. We spent, well, as the applicant mentioned, quite a bit of time looking at the layout and design. Originally, the proposal was to be in the northern area of the site in the far corner on quite elevated ground. So we've sort of looked at that and amended the proposal as far as we can. So the village design statement also talks about, in particular, boundary treatments and the impact of accesses. So we have looked at that and brought it more in line with the guidance by removing the close bordered gates and the fencing and various inappropriate features that were going around the access. So those changes have been made in response to the VDS mainly. So now it's considered with the planting, it's more in line with that guidance.
Just quick supplementary. So my concern obviously is that the planting, and given the topography, the planting is not going to actually add a great deal in terms of softening a slab of a big building.
No, I mean, the planting was mainly in relation to the impact of the access. So the building, they've reduced the height by approximately ½ metre and brought it on a lower lying ground. Obviously, the hedge won't obscure the building, it won't obscure views of it, but it's more appropriately related to the boundary rather than being sat out in a central position out in the field. So because it's on lower lying ground as well, it's considered more appropriate, and the materials would have an appearance of a typical agricultural building, which we don't consider as out of place in open fields.
Councillor Laning again.
Thank you very much, Chair. The whole site of this field, is that all in the ownership of one owner, or has it been split up into several? Because this barn that's being built would appear then to be storing stuff for the stables the other side of the area.
So the location plan, the blue line on the location plan shows the extent of ownership.
Yes, but where are the stables then that are built on that area? Is that outside the ownership area?
There's no stables within the ownership area.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, members, we move to debate. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an interesting application. Yes, it is a very large proposed structure. Wood slatted barn immediately adjacent to a fairly used highway. For the size of land that is enclosed in red, it seems enormously large. to be able to store that amount of hay, okay, it is up to the particular landowner as to they want to do that. But it does seem a very large structure for such a small area of land. And being adjacent to that road, it's going to look colossal as you drive past it. I do have concerns, Chair. I'd like to hear what other members think before I make my mind up.
Councillor Lee?
Just want to echo what has just been said. It just seems out of proportion to the size of the plot. And again, the impact on the open countryside seems incompatible. I understand the policy and what Liz has said. And I'm just wondering, is there what attitude do we have to adjust that or make suggestions as to ameliorate that? And I don't think we're in a good position to do that, but it is a concern.
Well, I'd like to say that I think our officer has negotiated with the applicant and reduced the size of the barn, because they did want a bigger barn in the first place, and reduced and moved the position of the barn to make it less intrusive. And it is clad in wood, which is, they could just have gone with the concrete sides, which, so many do. And I believe that our officer, who is recommending approval, has considered it within the parameters of our local plan and other planning documents, including the village design statement, and has mitigated as much as she can. This application, and in her view, it falls within our policies. So I'm happy to support her recommendation. I think she's done as much as is possible to mitigate the impact, but it's up to members to make that decision. Anybody else wanting to speak? Councillor Small.
I think I agree with what Councillor Reid and Lee said, in that it does seem a little bit out of proportion, especially when considering there's no stabling. I'm just unhappy to support it, given the size and the plot of land it's on.
I'd just like to introduce our corporate head of planning for a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, I just want to say you do have to identify some planning harm. We've tested it against the policy, and actually the case officer's recommendations, and it's acceptable. And if you didn't find it acceptable, I think just saying that you'd have preferred something different or a different size or to operate it in a different way isn't a really good planning reason. You need to identify some planning harm to sort of say why you consider the proposal doesn't accord with DM12 of your policy and other policies in the local plan, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Pinnock. Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. I have the same nervousness as the others. However, if we're saying there's going to be a barn there and it's going to be at that height, whether it's 2 bays, 3 bays or 4 bays, does that make any material difference to the impact on the passing traffic on the road? Probably doesn't. And I think I'm probably agreeing with you, therefore, that we have to go along with the officer's recommendation and support this, because there's no good planning reason not to.
Thank you. So if there's no more contributions to debate, we move to the recommendation, which is to permit this application. Can I see all those in favour of permission, please?
Lee, 6.
And those against? So that application is approved. Thank you. We'll now break for lunch and return at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.